Hey there, tonight we're delving into the forgotten Christmas traditions of the Roman Empire, where winter festivals blended with imperial power plays. What you're about to discover reveals how ancient feasts shaped the holiday we know today. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. If you've ever bemoaned the chaos of a family Christmas dinner, spare a thought for the ancient Romans and their Saturnalia festival, a week-long extravaganza starting on December 17th, where chaos wasn't just invited, it was the guest of honor. Forget your grandmother's fruitcake or that awkward sweater from your aunt. Saturnalia was the ultimate rager of the Roman calendar. Picture toga-clad revelers flooding the streets, swapping gifts, and flipping societal norms on their heads. It was like a 7-day office party where the boss handed out bonuses and then got stuck doing the filing. Saturnalia celebrated Saturn, the god of agriculture, and this festival of joy and misrule was the Romans' way of kissing the harvest season goodbye while gearing up for the leaner months ahead. At its core, Saturnalia was a social pressure release valve, an ancient version of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. For a week, slaves were temporarily freed from their duties, and roles were reversed. Picture the Roman elite serving dinner to their servants, a brief, bizarre reversal of the norm. Sounds like a heartwarming Hallmark movie until you remember that those same servants would be back to cleaning up after the party come January. Now, let's talk gift-giving. Romans exchanged everything from candles to gag gifts to more practical items like clothing, because who doesn't need another pair of socks? Poet Catullus even labeled Saturnalia the best of times, perhaps because he got a particularly nice pair of togas that year. This tradition of gift-giving, with its roots tangled in the festive vines of Saturnalia, set the stage for the jolly gift exchanges we cherish today, minus the Amazon wish lists. But this wasn't just some quaint little holiday. Rome, ever the grand influencer of its day, saw an economic impact as significant as a modern Black Friday sale. Entire fortunes could be spent ensuring that the banquet table groaned under the weight of exotic foods and fine wines. The rich pulled out all the stops, and the not-so-rich tried to keep up, sometimes ending in financial ruin. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of maxing out your credit cards for that must-have holiday gadget. Despite the revelry, there was a practical side to Saturnalia, one that made sure the economic wheels kept turning. Merchants and artisans saw brisk business as citizens rushed to buy gifts and feast supplies. The bustling Roman markets were the beating heart of this winter celebration, a far cry from the peaceful nativity scenes that would later grace our holiday cards. As much as Saturnalia was about indulgence, it was also a time for reflection on the social fabric of Roman life. The temporary suspension of norms offered a glimpse into a world turned upside down, where power structures were challenged, if only for a brief moment. It was a reminder that beneath the pomp and circumstance of empire, everyone was just a toga-wearing mortal. In the grand tapestry of history, Saturnalia is often overshadowed by the birth of Christmas, but its influence is undeniable. The Romans knew how to throw a party, and their festive spirit carried echoes into future celebrations, morphing and adapting across centuries and cultures. So, next time you find yourself amidst the holiday hustle and bustle, remember that you're participating in a tradition as old as Rome itself, just with fewer togas and more ugly sweaters. Now, as we shift gears from the riotous feasts of Saturnalia, let's dive into the Roman Empire's shrewd use of these winter festivals. The emperors weren't just party animals. They were political masterminds who knew how to turn a festival into a tool of statecraft. Picture this. You're an emperor looking to score some brownie points with the populace. What better way than to host a week-long bash that makes everyone forget their troubles, at least temporarily? It was ancient Rome's version of bread and circuses, with a generous side helping of PR. The emperors, ever the opportunists, realized that these festivals were perfect for flaunting their generosity and benevolence. During Saturnalia, emperors would often foot the bill for lavish public feasts, a gesture that screamed both "I'm one of you" and don't forget who's in charge here. Augustus, for instance, was known for his knack for mixing pleasure with politics. He used Saturnalia to reinforce his image as a benevolent ruler, making sure that his reign was associated with prosperity and good times. A smart play, given that a happy populace is a compliant one. But let's not sugarcoat it. While the festivities might have been genuine fun for the average Roman, they were also a carefully orchestrated spectacle meant to reinforce the emperor's divine right to rule. The line between religion and politics was as blurry as a toga after too much wine. Emperors were seen as semi-divine figures, and what better way to remind the masses of that than by playing the role of a generous god spreading joy and goodwill. However, not every emperor was as smooth as Augustus. Take Caligula, for instance. His attempts to use festivals as political theatre were more like a tragicomedy. Sure, he threw lavish parties, but his tyrannical antics often overshadowed any goodwill he might have garnered. It's hard to think fondly of an emperor who allegedly tried to make his horse a consul. Caligula's reign was a reminder that no amount of gift-giving could mask the stench of bad governance. Meanwhile, the religious aspect of these festivals was as much about state control as it was about divine worship. The Roman religion was a polytheistic smorgasbord, and the gods were as integral to politics as they were to daily life. During festivals like Saturnalia, public religious ceremonies were grand affairs, often funded by the state. The message: the gods have blessed Rome, and by extension, its emperor. It was a clever way to reinforce the idea that Rome's success was divinely ordained. Of course, not everyone bought into the pageantry. Some Romans saw through the smoke and mirrors, grumbling that these festivals were more about political propaganda than genuine piety. The philosopher Seneca, for example, wasn't shy about criticizing the excesses of Saturnalia and the hypocrisy of those who preached moderation but indulged shamelessly. His writings hinted at the underlying tensions between public spectacle and private belief. The economic implications were hard to ignore, too. These festivals were a boon for the economy, akin to a modern-day holiday shopping season on steroids. Merchants and traders made a killing, while the political elite used the booming market as a demonstration of Rome's prosperity under their rule. The trickle-down effect, however, was a bit of a myth. While the rich got richer, the poor often found themselves deeper in debt, having spent beyond their means to keep up with the festivities. In essence, the festivals were a microcosm of Roman society, glittering on the surface, but with cracks lurking underneath. The emperor's ability to harness these events for political gain was a testament to their understanding of power and perception. It was a delicate dance of maintaining control while appearing generous and approachable. But let's not get too cynical. For many Romans, these festivals were a genuine highlight of the year, a chance to escape the drudgery of daily life and indulge in the pleasures of food, drink, and camaraderie. The line between spectacle and sincerity was often blurred, leaving us to wonder whether the Romans were truly fooled by the propaganda or simply complicit in the charade. So, the next time you find yourself swept up in the holiday spirit, remember the ancient Romans and their winter festivals. They knew how to throw a party with purpose, blending faith and power into a heady mix of celebration and control. And while their methods might seem a bit Machiavellian by today's standards, they offer a timeless lesson in the art of balancing spectacle with substance. From the glittering chaos of Saturnalia, let's march right into the era of Constantine, where emperors traded in their laurels for halos, and Rome's polytheistic party scene got a devout makeover. You see, Constantine the Great wasn't just a guy with a flair for battle. He also had an eye for divine branding. As the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity, he saw a golden, or maybe a haloed, opportunity to unify the sprawling empire under a single faith, and thus began the historic remix of pagan festivals into Christian celebrations. Now, here's where the story gets really juicy. Ever wonder why December 25th is the date we celebrate Christmas? Spoiler alert, it wasn't because Jesus RSVP'd for a winter birthday bash. The truth is, before it became the day of Christ's nativity in 336 AD, it was already a day for another kind of celebration, Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. This was a festival dedicated to Sol Invictus, a sun god who was all the rage in Rome. You could say the Son of God was strategically swapped in for the Sun God. Quite the celestial pun, right? Constantine and his successors didn't just pluck December 25th out of a hat. They knew that the best way to convert a populace was through familiarity. By superimposing Christian significance onto an already popular pagan feast day, they made the new religion more palatable to the masses. It was a classic case of, if you can't beat M, join M, or in this case, merge M. The empire was as vast as it was diverse, stretching from Britain to Egypt and containing a cornucopia of cultures and religions. A unified celebration helped to weave a common thread through this tapestry of peoples, and December 25th became the glue that stuck it all together. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with this divine mashup. The more cynical Romans eyed the new holiday with suspicion, much like you might view that fruitcake nobody wanted, but everyone received. Devout traditionalists lamented the loss of their beloved pagan rituals, while the early Christians grappled with the pagan past of their new holiday. It's worth noting that there's no biblical mandate for December 25th as Jesus' birthday, which led to some heated theological debates. Think of it as the ancient version of arguing whether pineapple belongs on pizza. The shift from pagan to Christian celebrations also had some serious economic undertones. Rome, ever the hub of commerce, saw the economic boon of winter festivals as a key way to grease the wheels of the empire's economy. Just like its pagan predecessor, Christmas became a time of gift-giving, feasting, and merrymaking, all activities that kept the markets bustling. The rich continued their tradition of extravagant spending, while the not-so-rich did their best to keep up appearances, sometimes at their financial peril. It was like a proto-Black Friday, where the goal was to spend until your denarii ran dry. But let's not forget the social implications of this religious realignment. Constantine's conversion was more than a personal spiritual awakening. It was a calculated political move. By aligning himself with Christianity, he tapped into a burgeoning movement that promised unity and stability, two commodities in short supply in the turbulent 4th century. The empire was like a soap opera with endless plot twists, civil wars, barbarian invasions, and a revolving door of emperors. Christianity offered a cohesive ideology that transcended local loyalties and regional guards, providing a unifying narrative across the empire's vast territories. Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 AD, which granted religious tolerance throughout the empire, was a game-changer. It effectively decriminalized Christianity and allowed it to flourish openly. This wasn't just about faith, it was about power and control. By supporting Christianity, Constantine was effectively saying, "I'm with the new kids on the block." And like any savvy ruler, he knew that aligning with a rising star was a smart move. Plus, it didn't hurt that the Christian guard promised eternal life, a pretty sweet deal compared to the capricious whims of the old guards. To cement his legacy, Constantine went all in, funding the construction of grand churches and basilicas, like the original St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. His patronage was a clear signal that Christianity was not only here to stay, but was the new imperial religion. The state and church became intertwined like vines on an ancient Roman villa, each supporting the other in a delicate dance of power and influence. Yet, beneath the surface of this religious harmony lay simmering tensions. The integration of pagan and Christian practices was not a seamless process. Old habits die hard, and many Romans clung to their pagan traditions even as they embraced Christianity. This created a cultural hybrid that sometimes bewildered both pagans and Christians. Think of it as a spiritual smoothie, a blend of old and new, with flavors that sometimes clashed. And then there was the issue of theology. The early church had its hands full trying to maintain doctrinal purity while appealing to converts with pagan backgrounds. This led to some interesting compromises, like adopting the use of evergreens, a symbol of eternal life, from pagan winter festivals. The Christmas tree, it turns out, has roots, pun intended, that go back much further than we might imagine. As the empire's official religion, Christianity gained unprecedented influence, but it also faced new challenges. Theologians and church leaders had to navigate the tricky waters of integrating diverse beliefs into a cohesive practice that could unify the empire. This was no small task, as doctrinal disputes and heresies cropped up like weeds in a Roman garden. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, convened by Constantine himself, was one attempt to address these theological discrepancies. It was a gathering of bishops who came together to hammer out key issues, like the nature of Christ and the calculation of Easter. The council's decisions were meant to unify the church, but they also sowed the seeds of future debates and divisions. Not everyone agreed with the outcomes, leading to schisms that would echo through the centuries. In this grand transformation from pagan festivals to Christian holidays, we see a testament to the resilience of traditions and the adaptability of human culture. The Romans, ever pragmatic, showed us that change is a constant, and that sometimes the best way to embrace the future is to borrow from the past. The birth of Christmas, as we know it, was less about a single divine moment and more about a complex tapestry of culture, politics, and economics. So, the next time you find yourself humming a Christmas carol, remember that you're partaking in a tradition that's older and more intricate than you might have guessed. It's a celebration that has survived the rise and fall of empires, adapting and thriving through the ages. And as we continue to weave our own stories into this ancient narrative, we're reminded that history is never just a series of dates and events. It's a living, breathing tale of human ingenuity and resilience. So, as we unwrap the layers of what Christmas has become, let's delve into the cultural fusion that transformed a once purely pagan festival into the jingle bell juggernaut it is today. If you think the holiday season is hectic now, imagine the chaos of merging the beliefs and traditions of an entire empire. It's like trying to fit a Roman square peg into a Christian round hole with a side dish of mistletoe. Start with the Romans' love for Saturnalia, a festival where social norms were tossed out the window faster than you can say, carpe diem. This was a time when roles reversed, and society flipped upside down, a concept that must have tickled the early Christian sense of the topsy-turvy world of divine wisdom. But as the emperor's grip on the empire began to slip, the need for social cohesion became paramount. Enter Christianity, stage left, with its promise of eternal life and a moral compass that pointed north, south, east and west, depending on whom you asked. The early church, ever the pragmatist, knew they needed a way to bring pagans into the fold without triggering a full-blown cultural mutiny. So they did what any savvy institution would do. They co-opted. Take the Roman custom of gift-giving during Saturnalia, for instance. The church gave it a Christian twist, linking it to the gifts of the Magi. Voila! Suddenly, exchanging gifts wasn't just a nod to Roman tradition, but a reflection on the generosity of wise men following a star. Talk about a PR masterstroke. The blending of these traditions resulted in a holiday rich in customs, some of which have become as entrenched in December as bad weather and overspending. The Yule log, for example, has its roots in Germanic paganism, where lighting a large log in the hearth was meant to bring good luck for the coming year. As Christianity spread, it wasn't hard to align this fiery tradition with the celebration of Christ as the light of the world. Who knew burning wood could be so theologically loaded? And speaking of fire, let's talk about candles. The Romans loved them so much during Saturnalia that they exchanged them as gifts. Fast forward to the Christian era, and candles became a symbol of the light of Christ driving out darkness. This transformation was about as smooth as a Roman chariot race, but it stuck. Today, those flickering flames are as much a part of Christmas as Santa's red suit. A suit, by the way, that's a Coca-Cola creation from the 1930s, not some ancient sartorial choice. Now, let's address one of the more bizarre cultural mashups, the Christmas tree. While often touted as a Christian symbol, its origins are rooted, pun fully intended, in pagan traditions celebrating winter solstice. The evergreen, with its promise of life amid winter's death, was a symbol of hope and renewal long before it was a backdrop for your family's awkward holiday card. It wasn't until the 16th century that devout Christians in Germany began bringing trees into their homes, dressing them up like some festive peacock. But perhaps the most ridiculous, yet charming, mashup is the figure of Santa Claus. Inspired by St. Nicholas, a 4th-century Greek bishop known for his penchant for anonymous gift-giving, this jolly old man has become a commercial colossus. Yet he also borrows heavily from Germanic god Odin, who during Yule would lead a great hunting party through the sky. So the next time you see Santa flying his reindeer, You're actually witnessing a mythological mashup with roots as tangled as a string of Christmas lights. This cultural fusion, however, was not without its contradictions. The Puritans, those dour-faced party-poopers of the 17th century, banned Christmas in parts of England and America, seeing it as a thinly veiled excuse for debauchery and excess. They viewed the holiday as a Frankenstein's monster of pagan excess wrapped in Christian garb, a sentiment that reminds us not everyone saw this blending as harmonious. As time marched on, Christmas continued to evolve, influenced by economic forces as much as spiritual ones. By the Victorian era, the holiday had undergone a transformation that Charles Dickens would immortalize in A Christmas Carol. The focus shifted to family, charity, and goodwill, a far cry from the raucous revelry of Roman times. Yet the economic impact remained significant. Retailers capitalized on the season as early as the 19th century, launching what would become a relentless commercial juggernaut. So, what survived this centuries-long cultural remix? The spirit of giving, the light in darkness, the hope for renewal. These themes have persisted, albeit in forms that would baffle a Roman reveler or a medieval monk. The holiday is a testament to humanity's ability to adapt and adopt, to blend the old with the new in an ever-evolving dance of tradition and innovation. In this grand tapestry of holiday cheer, contradictions abound. We find ourselves celebrating a religious holiday with roots in pagan rituals, all while engaging in commercial activities that would make a Roman merchant blush. It's a holiday that embodies both the sacred and the secular, the holy and the hedonistic. And perhaps that's the magic of Christmas. It's a mirror reflecting both our best intentions and our most delightful absurdities. As we wrap up this part of our historical sleigh ride, remember that the Christmas we know today is a patchwork of traditions, each with its own story to tell. It's a holiday as complex and contradictory as human history itself. So next time you're sipping on eggnog or hanging a stocking, take a moment to ponder the eclectic journey that brought these customs to your doorstep. And stay tuned for the final chapter, where we'll explore how Christmas continued to evolve into the global phenomenon it is today. And so, as we sip our eggnog and hang our stockings, let's ponder on how the Romans, with their penchant for elaborate festivals and political theatrics, have left a legacy that still twinkles in our modern Christmas celebrations. The truth is, the Roman Empire was a bit like your eccentric uncle at the holiday dinner, full of grand gestures and unpredictable antics, but somehow essential to the family tapestry. Their blend of faith, power, and revelry created a cultural concoction that has aged better than a fine wine. First, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the reindeer on the rooftop, the economic impact. Back in the day, a Roman festival wasn't just a knees-up, it was an economic juggernaut. Saturnalia, for example, saw fortunes spent on gifts and feasts, a practice that has snowballed into today's festive spending frenzy. In 2021, U.S. consumers alone shelled out over $886 billion during the holiday season. Sure, credit cards and online shopping are modern conveniences, but the spirit of splurging is as ancient as Rome itself. Now, let's talk about the social dynamics. The Romans were masters at using festivals to blur the lines of social hierarchy. During Saturnalia, slaves dined like kings, and roles were reversed in a temporary utopia of equality. Fast forward to today, and we see echoes of this in our emphasis on charity and goodwill during Christmas. Whether it's donating to a food bank or volunteering at a shelter, the holiday season is still about leveling the playing field, if only for a moment. But what about the blending of traditions? The Romans were experts at absorbing the customs of conquered lands, much like a cultural sponge. This adaptability is a hallmark of Christmas, which has borrowed from a myriad of sources over the centuries. The carols we sing, the trees we decorate, the feasts we devour, all are threads in a rich tapestry woven from diverse cultures. It's a bit like a historical potluck where everyone brings a dish, and somehow it all works together in a delightful medley. And then there's the political maneuvering. The emperors knew that a happy populace was a compliant one, so they used festivals like Saturnalia as a tool of control. Constantine continued this tradition by embracing Christianity and reshaping the empire's spiritual landscape. His strategic move to align the church with the state laid the groundwork for a new world order, one that saw Christmas evolve from a pagan festival into a Christian celebration. This marriage of church and state was a political masterstroke, blurring the lines between divine authority and earthly power. In the realm of myth-busting, it's important to note that many of our cherished Christmas traditions have roots far removed from the Nativity story. The Nativity scene itself, popularized by St. Francis of Assisi in 1223, was a medieval innovation, not an ancient one. And let's not forget Santa Claus, whose evolution from St. Nicholas to the jolly figure we know today is a testament to the power of myth-making. He's a symbol of the holiday's enduring magic, a blend of history and imagination that captivates us year after year. So, what's the takeaway from all this historical holiday cheer? Perhaps it's that Christmas, like the Roman festivals before it, is a celebration of humanity's resilience and creativity. We've taken the building blocks of ancient traditions and constructed a holiday that reflects our values, our excesses, and our hopes. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a living narrative that shapes and is shaped by each generation. In the end, the Roman Empire's influence on Christmas is a testament to the enduring power of tradition. For all their faults, and there were many, the Romans understood the importance of celebration in fostering community and continuity. Their legacy is a holiday that, despite its commercial trappings, still prompts us to pause, reflect, and connect. It's a season of light in the darkest time of the year, a nod to the sun gods of old and the promises of new beginnings. So as you gather with family and friends, remember the Romans who, in their own chaotic way, helped set the stage for the festivities we cherish today. Celebrate the traditions that have crossed continents and centuries to bring us together. And as you do, raise a glass to the complex tapestry of history, faith, and festivity that makes Christmas the wonderful, unpredictable holiday it is. Because in the end, whether under a Roman sky or a modern one, the spirit of the season remains timeless. A little bit of chaos, a lot of joy, and a touch of magic. The sun barely peeks over the horizon, but the smell has already hit you like a medieval mace to the face. Welcome to a day in the life of a medieval tannery worker. If you thought your 9 to 5 was rough, buckle up. The tannery, a cornerstone of medieval economy and the town's olfactory nightmare, is about to give you a wake-up call stronger than any triple espresso. Let's set the scene. It's the break of dawn, and you're in a medieval town which, despite the quaint stone buildings and rustic charm, has one undeniable feature, a stench so potent that even the rats have formed a union to protest. Tanning was a necessary evil, and evil might even be putting it lightly. These places were often relegated to the very edge of town, near rivers or streams, because, let's be honest, nobody wanted that smell wafting through their breakfast ale. And yet, tanneries were indispensable, fueling the local economy like a medieval Amazon warehouse. Tanneries were all about turning raw animal hides into leather, and leather back then was as crucial as Wi-Fi is today. We're talking shoes, armor, saddles, belts, and even book bindings. If it could be made from leather, it was, because the alternative was, well, there wasn't really a viable alternative. This meant that every town worth its salt had at least one tannery, despite their less than desirable aroma. The day starts with you trudging to the tannery, likely cursing the life choices that led you here. You weren't alone in this olfactory assault. Back in the day, entire families might work together. And why not? It was an all-hands-on-deck situation, a family bonding experience that modern folks might liken to assembling IKEA furniture. Frustrating, but oddly unifying. You'd start by sorting the hides, which arrived fresh from the local slaughterhouse, still carrying that delightful eau de barnyard. Cattle and sheep were the stars of the show here, with their hides being the most commonly used. A single tannery could process hundreds of hides in a year. That sounds impressive, until you consider the labor-intensive process required to transform these floppy, smelly bits of animal into something useful. Let's not forget the geography of these places. Tanning was a water-intensive process, so tanneries were often situated by rivers. Plus, the constant water flow helped carry away some of the stench and waste, though not nearly enough to make it pleasant. The out-of-sight, out-of-mind philosophy didn't quite apply when the wind changed direction. Economically speaking, leather was king. In an era before synthetic materials, it was as valuable as gold. A skilled tanner could earn a decent living, albeit at the cost of their nasal passages and social life. The demand for leather was immense. Consider this. A single knight's armor could require as much as 30 square feet of leather. Multiply that by an army, and you've got yourself a booming industry. But before you romanticize the leathery spoils of this trade, let's debunk a few myths. The life of a tanner was not a glamorous one. The work was backbreaking and hazardous. Chemical burns from lime and dog feces. Yes, you heard that right. Used in the process were common occupational hazards. Modern OSHA standards would have a field day here. Working conditions were about as far from a medieval fairy tale as you could get. Picture yourself standing ankle-deep in a concoction of water, lime, and you guessed it, poop, stirring hides with a wooden paddle. It's the kind of job that makes you question every decision that led you to this point. But despite the hardships, tannery was an essential cog in the medieval machine. Its products were vital to everyday life, and its economic impact was significant. Towns with thriving tanneries could afford a little more luxury, a little more security. They were the silent heroes of the economy, powering everything from fashion to warfare. So there you are, standing on the outskirts of town, knee-deep in the medieval version of toxic waste, and you might be wondering why anyone would choose this life. The truth is, many didn't. Tanning was often a family trade passed down through generations. It was a job that needed doing, and in an era with limited career options, it provided a steady, albeit smelly, income. The medieval economy was a beast of necessity, and tanneries were its unsung workhorses. They were a testament to human ingenuity and endurance, a reminder that sometimes progress stinks, literally. As you wrap up your morning routine, you might be tempted to romanticize the medieval past, but the reality is a little more pungent and a lot more grounded than the fairy tales suggest. Welcome to the world of medieval tanneries, where the economy thrives and your sense of smell goes to die. So, you're knee-deep in the medieval equivalent of hazardous waste, but the day is young, and the real fun is just beginning. Let's kick things off with the tools of the trade, because, trust me, you'll want to know what you're getting into before you roll up your sleeves. You've got your lime, your urine, and your animal brains. Basically, a medieval smoothie gone horribly wrong. First up, lime. No, not the citrus fruit that jazzes up your Taco Tuesday. We're talking about calcium oxide, a chemical compound that, while not great for your skin, is fantastic for removing hair from animal hides. You dunk the hides in a lime bath for a few days until the hair just slides off like a bad toupee. It's like a medieval spa treatment, but instead of leaving with glowing skin, you're left with an overwhelming urge to wash your hands 1,000 times. Now, about those tanning pits. If you're imagining a quaint little pool where hides gently soak, think again. These pits were often just holes in the ground filled with a cocktail of water, oak bark, and whatever else the tanneries had lying around. It was the medieval version of a DIY project gone awry. The hides would steep in these pits for months, absorbing tannins that would transform them from soggy messes into durable leather. Picture yourself as a human blender, stirring this concoction with a long wooden pole. It's a full-body workout that no cross-fit class could rival, and the smell. Let's just say it's an aroma that lingers longer than your regret. And then there's the urine. Yes, urine. In a time before synthetic chemicals, urine was a surprisingly effective agent for softening hides. Whole families would contribute, turning their collective bladder output into a key component of the leather-making process. You might be tempted to romanticize this as a quaint example of communal living, but let's be real. It's a bit like asking your neighbors to pitch in for a group project that's more you than uo. Next, let's address the brain matter. You heard me right, animal brains. The enzymes in the brains were perfect for breaking down the fats and proteins in the hides, making them more pliable. This technique, known as brain tinning, wasn't just a bizarre medieval ritual. It actually produced a remarkably soft and durable leather. And while we could wax poetic about the ingenuity of our ancestors, let's not forget that the process involved literally massaging brains into skins. It's enough to make you rethink those romantic notions of handcrafted goods. Now, if you're wondering why anyone would willingly partake in this delightful medley of smells and textures, remember, this was a world without alternatives. Leather was as crucial then as smartphones are now. You didn't just walk into a store and pick up a pair of Nikes. You relied on local craftsmen to transform raw materials into everyday essentials. It was a gritty, smelly, but ultimately indispensable job. And let's not forget the economic stakes. Leather was a high-value product, and the tanneries were pivotal in their communities, much like that one coffee shop with the decent Wi-Fi. But before you start romanticizing the idea of artisanal craftsmanship, let's pull back the curtain a bit more. Working in a tannery was physically demanding and hazardous. Forget about OSHA-approved gear. You were lucky if you had a decent pair of gloves. The risk of chemical burns from lime and infections from cuts was ever present. And the work hours, grueling to say the least. There were no weekends off or paid vacations, just endless days of backbreaking labor. Yet, despite the challenges, tanneries were vital to medieval life, fueling economies and helping to shape the world as we know it. So, as you stand in the midst of this sensory assault, remember that you're part of a legacy, a long line of artisans who turned necessity into livelihood. It's a testament to human resilience and the lengths we'll go to for survival. Sure, it's not the fairy tale version of history, but it's real, raw, and undeniably human. As the day wears on, you might be tempted to glamorize the past, but the reality is a bit more pungent and a lot more gritty. Welcome to the world of medieval tanneries, where the economy thrives. Your sense of smell goes to die. You're standing there, ankle-deep in medieval muck, pondering the cosmic joke that is your life when you notice someone giving you the side-eye. No, it's not because you're the new kid on the block. It's because you're part of a group that society loves to look down on, the tanners. Welcome to the social labyrinth of medieval tanneries, where class dynamics are as pungent as the hides you're working with. So, who were these unsung heroes of the leather world? Often, tanners were the lower rungs of the social ladder, with some communities viewing them as outcasts. In a time when your job could define your social standing, being a tanner wasn't exactly a golden ticket to the medieval equivalent of high society. You see, the smell of your work tended to follow you home, and let's just say it wasn't the kind of musk that got you invited to the Lord's banquet. Yet, despite their less-than-glamorous status, tanners were crucial cogs in the medieval economy. Leather was indispensable, and someone had to do the dirty work. But don't go thinking these folks were all lone wolves howling at the moon. Enter the guilds, medieval trade unions with a dose of drama and a dash of bureaucracy. These guilds controlled the trade, ensuring that only those who paid their dues and followed the rules could call themselves tanners. Think of it as the original members-only club, but instead of sipping cocktails, you were elbow-deep in lime and brains. Guilds wielded significant power, setting prices, regulating quality, and even deciding who could join the trade. Not a fan of rules? Well, tough luck, because stepping out of line could mean fines or worse, expulsion. And in a world where your guild membership was your meal ticket, getting kicked out was akin to social suicide. But for those who played by the rules, guilds offered protection and a sense of camaraderie. Plus, it never hurt to have a group of like-minded individuals who understood why your clothes always smelled like a barnyard. Now, let's talk about the social hierarchy, shall we? In the grand scheme of medieval life, the tanners were the underdogs. They were the folks you loved to hate, and not just because they made you hold your nose. Their work was essential, yet they were seen as dirty, both literally and figuratively. It was a classic case of can't live with them, can't live without them. The irony. Despite their lowly status, tanners often found themselves rubbing elbows, though not literally, because you were, with the wealthy merchants who depended on their leather to make a buck. And here's where things get interesting. While society might have shunned them, tanners had an ace up their sleeve: economic clout. Leather was big business, and towns with thriving tanneries were like medieval Silicon Valleys, attracted trade, boosted local economies, and sometimes even had a say in town affairs. It's the classic story of the underdog powering the machine while getting none of the glory. But let's not romanticize their plight. The social stigma was real, and it clung to tanners like last night's garlic. They lived on the fringes, both geographically and socially, often in guild-provided housing near the tannery. It was a life of hard work, long hours, and few luxuries. Yet, for many, it was a family affair, with skills passed down from generation to generation. In a world with limited career options, tanning was a legacy job, offering a steady, if smelly, income. Now, before you start feeling too sorry for these folks, remember this: tanners were survivors. In a society that often turned its nose up at them, they thrived through grit, determination, and a little help from their guild buddies. They were the backbone of the economy, the unsung heroes who kept the medieval world turning. And while they might not have been sipping mead with the lords, they knew their worth. They understood that without their labor, the knights wouldn't have their armor, the merchants wouldn't have their goods, and the monks wouldn't have their precious book bindings. So, as you stand there, contemplating your place in this pungent hierarchy, remember that being a tanner was about more than just turning hides into leather. It was about resilience in the face of adversity, finding dignity in hard work, and knowing that even if society didn't always recognize your value, you still played a vital role in the grand tapestry of medieval life. And who knows, maybe one day, those same folks who turned up their noses might just thank you for the sturdy shoes on their feet, or, at the very least, acknowledge that the town's prosperity owes a little something to the folks working at the edge of town, knee-deep in the muck. As the afternoon sun dips lower, casting long shadows that do little to mask the stench, you might start to wonder about the longer-term consequences of all this muck and mire. Sure, transforming hides into leather is a medieval miracle of sorts, but what's the catch? Spoiler alert. The environmental and health impacts were about as delightful as a medieval dentist visit. First, let's talk about the rivers. Those picturesque waterways winding past our quaint medieval town might seem charming until you remember they're basically the town's garbage disposal. Tanneries were thirsty beasts, guzzling water like it was happy hour at the local tavern. But what went in must come out, and out it came, laden with lime, animal fats, and all manner of unsavory tannery byproducts. Did someone say water contamination? You bet. The waste was dumped right back into the rivers, turning them into medieval soup kitchens for bacteria and pollutants. Now, if you're imagining a murky, bubbling cauldron of waste swirling by, you're on the right track. Medieval folks didn't have the luxury of modern wastewater treatment plants, so what flowed into the river often stayed there, happily ignored until someone downstream got sick. It's a classic case of not my problem until it is, and trust me, it often became their problem. The environmental impact was a slow-motion disaster unfolding in real time, like watching a snail try to cross a highway. But hold your nose because we're diving deeper. The tanneries didn't just pollute the water, they also contaminated the very air you were trying not to breathe. Imagine the aromas of ammonia, decaying flesh, and lime wafting through the air like a medieval potpourri. Air quality, not exactly a priority. This wasn't the age of catalytic converters or air purifiers. It was more like, let's just hope the wind's blowing the other way. And what about the health of those brave souls who toiled in this aromatic apocalypse? Well, let's just say the job came with a few occupational hazards. If you thought repetitive strain injuries from typing were bad, try standing knee-deep in lime, and you're in and day out. Chemical burns were as common as bad haircuts. The risk of infections from open cuts was ever present. Life expectancy wasn't exactly through the roof either. Working in a tannery was like playing a game of how long can I dodge the medieval Grim Reaper. But don't start thinking these workers were oblivious to the risks. They may not have had a degree in environmental science, but they knew enough to recognize the dangers. The problem: there weren't many alternatives. Tanning was a job, and for many, it was the only job. It was either this or, well, nothing. And when you're faced with starvation or a potentially toxic workplace, you pick the lesser of two smelly evils. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. The tannery's environmental impact wasn't just a local problem. It had broader social implications, too. Towns near tanneries often struggled with public health issues, and diseases spread faster than gossip in a medieval market. The social fabric was stretched thin, as the community had to cope with the fallout of living near a tannery. It was a bit like living next to a modern-day landfill, but without the benefit of government regulations or neighborhood associations to complain to. And yet, despite the grime, the disease, and the pollution, tanning remained a linchpin of medieval life. Leather was indispensable, and the economic incentives were too powerful to ignore. Towns with tanneries often thrived economically, their prosperity masking the environmental damage lurking beneath the surface. It's the age-old story of trade-offs, economic gain at the cost of environmental pain. And while the tanners themselves might not have enjoyed the high life, their work fueled a thriving trade network that spread across Europe. So, as you slog through this pungent landscape, remember that the story of medieval tanneries is one of contrasts. It's a tale of necessity and ingenuity, of economic prosperity and environmental degradation. And while it's tempting to romanticize the past, the reality is far more complex and far stinkier than any fairy tale would have you believe. The tanneries were more than just places of work. They were symbols of the human capacity for endurance and adaptation, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the day drags on and the sun begins to set, you're left pondering the strange duality of it all. The beauty of handcrafted leather against the backdrop of polluted rivers and hazardous working conditions. It's a reminder that progress often comes at a price, and in the world of medieval tanneries, that price was steep indeed. But stay tuned, because the story doesn't end here. There's more muck to wade through, more myths to debunk, and more lessons to learn from the past. As twilight drapes its shadowy cloak over the medieval town, the tannery, our pungent theater of toil, finally winds down. The ceaseless churning of hides and human endurance gives way to a rare moment of stillness. But before you rush to scrub off the day's grime, let's untangle the web of economic, social, and environmental threads that make up this medieval tapestry. Spoiler alert. It's a story as tangled as a knight's chainmail after a tumble. First, let's talk about the economics of leather. The tanning industry was less a quaint craft fair and more a medieval industrial complex. Leather wasn't just a luxury. It was the backbone of medieval infrastructure. From the shoes on a peasant's feet to the armor protecting a noble's hide, leather was omnipresent. You could think of it as the medieval version of silicon, essential for everything from warfare to daily life. And in a world where resources weren't exactly plentiful, tanneries were the unsung heroes, ensuring everyone could keep their trousers up and their books bound. But let's not sugarcoat it. The economic benefits came with a whiff of irony, much like the tannery itself. Sure, tanneries fueled the local economy, but they were also a double-edged sword, cutting into the social fabric with all the finesse of a medieval surgeon. While towns with tanneries thrived financially, the folks who worked there were often socially ostracized. It's as if the town appreciated the cash flow but couldn't quite get past the odor. A bit like loving your dog, but wishing it had less of a fondness for rolling in mud. Now, how about those social dynamics? Here's where the romantic notion of the noble craftsman starts to fray. The guilds, while offering a semblance of protection and camaraderie, were also gatekeepers, ensuring that only a select few could partake in this lucrative, if odorous, trade. And while being part of a guild meant you weren't completely at the mercy of market forces, it didn't magically erase the stigma attached to working with stinking hides. In fact, tanners were often relegated to the outskirts of society, literally and figuratively. They lived and worked on the edges of towns, much like those quirky relatives you only visit during the holidays. Yet, for all their social marginalization, tanners held a surprising amount of economic power. The leather they produced was a hot commodity, and in a world where trade was the lifeblood of towns, this gave them a bargaining chip, albeit a smelly one. It's one of history's great ironies that those who were often shunned were also the ones propping up the economy. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. The harsh reality was that for many tanners, their economic clout didn't translate to social elevation. They remained the backbone of society, appreciated but seldom acknowledged. And then there's the environmental angle. If you've been paying attention, you know that medieval environmentalism was about as advanced as medieval dentistry. The rivers, once pristine, turned into chemical cocktails of lime and animal waste, serving as a grim reminder that progress often comes at a cost. And while the economic benefits of tanneries were undeniable, the environmental degradation was a ticking time bomb, much like that leftover fish stew you forgot in the fridge. But let's debunk a myth while we're here. The idea that medieval folks were blissfully unaware of the environmental impact of their industries. They knew all right. They just didn't have the luxury of doing much about it. In a world of limited choices, survival often trumped sustainability. It's a harsh truth, but one that underscores the human capacity for resilience, even when faced with the murkiest challenges. So, as the tannery shudders for the night, what have we learned from this aromatic odyssey? First, that the romance of medieval craftsmanship often glosses over the grit and grime of reality. Sure, there's a certain charm to the idea of handcrafted leather goods, but behind every beautifully tooled saddle or sturdy pair of shoes was a workforce slogging through chemical pits and social stigma. But more importantly, the story of the medieval tannery is a testament to human tenacity. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, communities found ways to adapt and thrive. They turned necessity into livelihood, and despite the pungent conditions, they left a legacy that ripples through time. The leather industry might have been a messy affair, but it was a crucial thread in the fabric of medieval life. And as you finally escape the tannery's clutches, contemplating a much-needed bath, remember this. The story of the tanneries is not just about hides and leather, but about the people who worked tirelessly to transform raw materials into the essentials of life. It's a tale of survival, ingenuity, and the enduring human spirit, a story as complex and layered as the leather itself. So next time you slip into a pair of leather shoes or run your fingers over a bound book, spare a thought for those medieval artisans who toiled in obscurity. They might not have been the heroes of legend, but in their own way, they were the unsung architects of progress. And while we've come a long way since those days of lime and urine, the lessons of the past linger, much like the scent of a bygone era. In the sun-drenched labyrinth of the Mediterranean, there was once a civilization so advanced it could make even the most modern architect feel like an amateur playing with Lego. Enter the Minoans, who were not just any Bronze Age civilization, but the rock stars of ancient building, minus the groupies and questionable tour bus hygiene. At the heart of this ancient empire lay the Grand Knossos Palace, a sprawling complex that would have made even the most legendary architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, do a double-take. Let's start with the elephant, or should we say Minotaur, in the room, the famous labyrinth. The story goes that beneath the palace there was a maze so intricate that even Google Maps would throw up its hands in defeat. Within it lurked the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature with a disposition best described as hangry. But before we get too carried away with this mythological beast, let's put on our sensible sandals and tread into reality. The so-called labyrinth might have been nothing more than a metaphor for the palace's complex architecture. In truth, Knossos was a veritable maze of over 200 rooms spread out over 22,000 square meters. It was a place where getting lost wasn't just passable, it was practically a rite of passage. Now, if you're wondering why anyone would design a palace with more twists and turns than a soap opera, here's the scoop. The Minoans weren't just showing off. The sprawling layout served a practical purpose. It was a hub of economic, political, and social life on Crete, a city within a palace, where trade, religion, and governance mingled as freely as the wine at a Minoan banquet. Rooms were designated for storage, workshops, and even religious rituals, showcasing an advanced level of urban planning that was as deliberate as it was dazzling. And speaking of dazzling, let's talk plumbing, because when it comes to ancient engineering, the Minoans were flushing away the competition. Yes, that's right. In an era when most people considered a hole in the ground to be the height of bathroom luxury, the Minoans were enjoying such modern conveniences as running water and flush toilets. Their plumbing system, which dates back to around 1700 BCE, featured terracotta pipes that ran through the walls of the palace. It's like they skipped several steps in the history of sanitation and went straight to a primitive version of the ensuite bathroom. Who needs indoor plumbing when you've got a palace that practically screams opulence from every corner? Now, let's get to the bull in the room, bull leaping, to be precise. This was the Minoan equivalent of an extreme sport, where participants would literally leap over bulls. Imagine, if you will, the thrill of skydiving, the danger of bull riding, and the grace of gymnastics all rolled into one. It sounds like something dreamed up by a group of adrenaline junkies after one too many cups of barley beer. But before we chalk this up as another myth, there's evidence to suggest it was a real ritual. Frescoes vividly depict acrobats vaulting over bulls, and it's believed to have been a rite of passage or a religious ceremony. Whether it was a test of bravery or just a quirky way to spend a Saturday afternoon, it certainly beats the monotony of your average gym workout. So, while the myths of minotaurs and labyrinths capture the imagination, the true marvel of Knossos lies in its architecture and innovation. This was a civilization that was centuries ahead of its time, blending practicality with a flair for the dramatic. The Minoans weren't just building palaces, they were setting the stage for civilizations to come. And as we dig deeper, both literally and figuratively, into the ruins of Knossos, we discover that reality, with all its intricate designs and clever solutions, can be just as fascinating as any myth. But let's not get too comfortable basking in the architectural glory of Knossos just yet, because behind those grand facades and ahead of their time plumbing innovations lay the real engine driving the Minoan civilization, their thriving economy. You see, the Minoans didn't just build palaces to host epic bull-leaping events and house Minotaur legends. They built them on the back of a formidable trade network that spanned the Mediterranean like a well-cast fishing net. And at the heart of this network was the true nectar of the gods, not ambrosia, but olive oil. Ah, olive oil, the liquid gold of the ancient world. Forget Bitcoin or gold bars. In the Bronze Age, olive oil was the currency that could make or break an economy. The Minoans were nothing short of maestros in the production and trade of this precious commodity. Crete, with its sun-drenched landscapes, was the perfect olive-growing paradise. They cultivated olives with the same care and precision as a modern-day sommelier curates a wine cellar. By around 1600 BCE, olive oil was more than just a cooking ingredient. It was a cornerstone of Minoan wealth and influence. Minoan olive oil was in such high demand that it powered a trade network reaching as far as the Levant, Egypt, and possibly even the Iberian Peninsula. Consider this. A single amphora of the finest Cretan olive oil could be traded for luxury goods, precious metals, or even political favors. It was the lubricant of diplomacy and commerce, smoothing the way for alliances and economic prosperity. The Minoans were not just master craftsmen in architecture, but also in the fine art of negotiation. Picture them as the Gordon Geckos of the ancient world, but with tunics instead of Wall Street suits. And let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The Minoans have often been portrayed as a peaceful society, frolicking in harmony with nature and their neighbors. But don't let the frescoes of dolphins and serene priestesses fool you. The reality was far more cutthroat. The Minoans were savvy traders who knew how to play the game of power. Their trade practices were as competitive as a reality TV cooking contest, and they didn't shy away from using their economic clout to forge strategic alliances or to crush competitors. They were more Game of Thrones than Garden of Eden. For instance, by controlling trade routes and access to essential goods like tin and copper, vital for making bronze, the Minoans wielded significant influence over their neighbors. They were the ancient world's equivalent of a tech giant, controlling key resources and trade channels. This economic dominance allowed them to maintain a naval fleet that ensured their interests were protected across the seas. The Minoan ships were the Ferraris of their time, sleek and fast, capable of outrunning potential threats and ensuring the steady flow of goods to and from Crete. But it wasn't just about goods and ships. The Minoan economy also thrived on the back of their craftsmanship. Minoan artisans created exquisite pottery, textiles, and metalwork that were highly sought after by other cultures. Minoan pottery, with its vibrant colors and intricate designs, was the IKEA of the ancient world. Ubiquitous, stylish, a must-have for any self-respecting Bronze Age home. Their workshops were bustling with activity, producing goods that would be exported across the Aegean and beyond, further cementing Crete's status as a commercial superpower. Of course, all this economic activity required a robust administrative system to keep track of it all. Enter Linear, the undeciphered script that the Minoans used for record-keeping. While scholars are still scratching their heads trying to crack the code, it's clear that Linear was crucial in managing the complex web of trade and commerce. It was the Excel spreadsheet of its day, tracking everything from olive oil inventories to trade agreements, and ensuring that the wheels of the Minoan economy kept turning smoothly. Yet, the prosperity of the Minoans was not without its challenges. Despite their economic prowess, they were not immune to the political machinations of the ancient world. Minoans had to navigate a delicate balance of power with neighboring civilizations, forming alliances when necessary and standing their ground when challenged. Their diplomatic savvy was as much a part of their success as their architectural and economic achievements. So, while the image of a peaceful Minoan utopia may be appealing, the reality was far more complex. The Minoans were shrewd operators in a world where economic might and political strategy were key to survival. They understood that to maintain their position at the top, they needed more than just beautiful palaces and a rich cultural heritage. They needed to be the best at the game of trade and diplomacy. As we continue to unravel the story of the Minoans, it becomes clear that their legacy is not just one of architectural marvels, but also of economic ingenuity and strategic acumen. Their ability to blend innovation with tradition and commerce with culture set the stage for a civilization that was as dynamic as it was enduring. And as we dig deeper into the ruins of their past, we find that the Minoans were not just builders of palaces, but architects of an ancient empire whose influence still echoes through the corridors of history. While the Minoans were deftly juggling trade deals and diplomatic chess games, they were also busy perfecting the art of not having their palaces crash down in a heap of rubble. An admirable goal, I think we can agree. Now, if you've ever dealt with a contractor or tried to navigate the labyrinth of a home renovation, pun completely intended, you'll appreciate the Minoans' engineering prowess even more. These guys were the ancient world's equivalent of a hard hat-wearing MacGyver, pulling off feats of architectural genius that even modern engineers would envy. You see, Crete is no stranger to the occasional earth-rattling shake-up. The island sits smack dab on the boundary of the African and Eurasian tectonic plates, making it a prime candidate for seismic activity. Yet, the Minoans were not interested in seeing their architectural masterpieces reduced to ancient dust. Instead, they devised innovative earthquake-resistant techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. Consider this. The Minoans used a combination of wooden frames and gypsum mortar to absorb and dissipate the energy of earthquakes. They were essentially building shock absorbers into their structures long before the invention of the spring. It's almost like they took a look at Mother Nature's temper tantrums and said, "Not today, Zeus." And while we're talking construction, let's give a nod to their ventilation systems. Picture this. In an era where air conditioning was as mythical as the Minotaur itself, the Minoans had already figured out how to keep their palaces cool and airy. They designed their buildings with open courtyards and strategic windows, creating natural ventilation that would have made any modern HVAC designer nod in approval. It's as if they knew how to channel the Mediterranean breezes perfectly, like getting a free upgrade to business class on a sweltering day. But let's not get too carried away with the idea that everything went smoothly on the construction sites of Knossos. Just like today, construction delays were a thing. Imagine trying to coordinate the efforts of hundreds of workers, all while appeasing the guards and keeping the wine flowing at the palace banquets. No wonder there might have been the occasional hiccup. One can almost hear the ancient equivalent of "we'll have it done by next Tuesday, promise," echoing through the corridors of the palace. Speaking of which, let's address the myth of the Minoan utopia, where everyone was as happy as a dolphin in a fresco. The reality was probably far less idyllic. While their engineering feats were impressive, they required a labor force that was likely less thrilled about the whole process. Building palaces and maintaining them was labor-intensive work, and while we don't have evidence of Minoan labor strikes, it's safe to assume that not every day was filled with joyful bricklaying and plastering. Now, let's talk about the Minoan penchant for multi-story buildings. The palace at Knossos boasted multiple levels, a rarity in the ancient world that required careful planning and skill to construct. Think of it as the ancient precursor to a high-rise, minus the elevators, and with a lot more frescoes. The Minoans utilized wooden columns to support upper floors, a material choice that provided flexibility in the event of an earthquake. It's a bit like opting for a bungee cord instead of a steel cable when you're planning to jump off a cliff. It just absorbs the shock better. And if all this engineering talk is making your head spin, take comfort in knowing that the Minoans were also masters of aesthetics. Their architectural designs were not just functional, they were visually stunning. Walls were adorned with vibrant frescoes, depicting everything from religious ceremonies to scenes of daily life, injecting a burst of color into the stone and plaster framework. It's like they knew that if you're going to live in an earthquake-prone zone, you might as well do it with a bit of style. But before we get swept away by the beauty of it all, let's pause to consider the economics of Minoan construction. Building such elaborate structures required resources, lots of them. Wood, stone, plaster, and labor didn't come cheap, and the Minoans had to ensure a steady supply chain to keep their projects on track. This is where their trade networks came into play once again. By securing access to essential materials through trade, they were able to sustain their ambitious architectural endeavors. It's a bit like running a modern construction company with a Rolodex full of reliable suppliers. And let's not forget the political implications of these grand structures. Palaces like Knossos were not just homes for the elite. They were symbols of power and authority. Their very existence was a statement, a reminder to both allies and adversaries of the Minoans' wealth and influence. These palatial complexes were the ancient equivalent of a skyscraper with a penthouse view, impressive, imposing, and a little intimidating. Yet, for all their architectural brilliance, the Minoans were not immune to the whims of fate. Despite their best efforts to earthquake-proof their buildings, natural disasters still posed a significant threat. The eruption of Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 BCE, one of the most significant volcanic events in recorded history, sent shockwaves through the region. While it's still debated how directly this disaster affected the Minoans, it's clear that such events tested their resilience and adaptability. So, as we stroll through the ruins of Knossos and marvel at the engineering genius of the Minoans, we're reminded of the delicate balance between human ingenuity and the forces of nature. The Minoans may have been masters of their domain, but they were also acutely aware of the precariousness of their position. They built with an eye towards eternity, but they also knew that nothing lasts forever, not even the most well-engineered palace. As we continue to peel back the layers of Minoan civilization, we see a society that was as complex as the architecture they left behind. They were innovators, dreamers, and realists all rolled into one. Their legacy is not just a testament to their architectural achievements, but also a reminder of the enduring quest to understand and harness the world around us. And as we dig deeper into their story, we find that the Minoans were not just builders of palaces, but architects of their destiny, navigating the challenges of their time with skill, style, and a touch of audacity. And so, as the dust of history settles over the sun-dappled ruins of Knossos, we zoom in on the stage where the Minoans played out their social and political drama. Because let's face it, behind every great palace lies an even greater power play. These architectural marvels were not just about flaunting wealth or keeping the rain off one's head. They were potent symbols of authority that would make even the most ostentatious celebrity mansion seem understated. Picture this. The sprawling palace complexes weren't just living quarters for the Minoan elite. They were the epicenters of governance and religion. Knossos, Phaistos, and Malia were the places where the magic happened, the Minoan equivalent of a bustling Capitol Hill mixed with the Vatican, all wrapped up with the flair of a high-end fashion show. These palaces were designed to impress both locals and visitors, a kind of ancient PR stunt that screamed, "Look at us, we're powerful, we're sophisticated, and our plumbing is better than yours." But let's not get swept away by the grandeur. These palaces had a job to do, and that was to keep the social hierarchy firmly in place. The architecture itself was a statement, with grand staircases and elevated throne rooms designed to remind everyone who was in charge. If you were lucky enough to be part of the Minoan elite, your daily commute involved strolling through frescoed halls that told stories of your ancestors' glory and your own divine right to rule. Forget an Instagram feed. These walls were the ultimate status update. And speaking of status, let's dive into the role of women in this society. The Minoans had a reputation for being somewhat progressive in this department, especially when compared to their contemporaries like the Mycenaeans, who were busy perfecting the art of patriarchal dominance. Minoan frescoes depict women in prominent roles, participating in religious ceremonies, and even engaging in sports like the infamous bull leaping. These images have led some to speculate that women in Minoan society enjoyed a level of equality that would make a Spartan warrior blush. But before we get too carried away, let's dial down the utopian fantasy a notch or two. While it's true that Minoan women had a visibility in public life that was unusual for the time, it doesn't necessarily mean they were running the show behind the scenes. The reality was likely more complex, a delicate dance of influence rather than outright authority. Women may have wielded power in religious contexts, serving as priestesses or participating in rituals, which in Minoan society were closely tied to governance. But in a world where palaces were also political nerve centers, it's safe to say that the ultimate decisions likely rested in the hands of male rulers. So, while Minoan women may have been more than just footnotes in the annals of history, they weren't exactly breaking the glass ceiling, more like tapping on it. Now, let's circle back to the palaces themselves. These architectural behemoths weren't just about grandeur. They were meticulously planned political tools. The layout of Knossos, for example, was designed to impress and intimidate. The main courtyard, where religious ceremonies and public gatherings took place, was strategically positioned to be visible from every angle, ensuring that the spectacle of power was always on display. The throne room, with its elaborate frescoes and intimidating griffin motifs, was not just a place to sit. It was a stage set for power plays and diplomatic negotiations. Imagine sealing an alliance or brokering a trade deal under the watchful eyes of mythical creatures. Talk about pressure. But these power symbols had another role to play. They were also economic engines, hubs of production and distribution that kept the Minoan economy humming along like a well-oiled chariot. Workshops within the palace complex churned out everything from olive oil to pottery, a constant reminder that the Minoans were not just about aesthetics, they were practical to the core. This economic activity wasn't just about filling the royal coffers, it was about maintaining control. By centralizing production and distribution, the Minoan elite ensured that they held the reins of power tightly, doling out resources as they saw fit. And here's where we inject a little myth-busting reality. The romantic image of a peaceful, egalitarian Minoan society is, let's be honest, a bit of a stretch. While they may not have been as warlike as their mainland neighbors, the Minoans were savvy operators who understood the art of power. Their palaces, with all their beauty and complexity, were as much about control as they were about culture. They were the headquarters of a sophisticated bureaucracy, where scribes diligently recorded transactions and inventories in linear, the undeciphered script that still tantalizes scholars today. This brings us to the gritty underbelly of Minoan society. For all its beauty and refinement, this was a world where power dynamics were as intricate as the palace frescoes. The social hierarchy was firmly entrenched, with the elite living in luxury while the lower classes toiled to keep the machine running. The palaces were not just symbols of power. They were the heart of a system that relied on the labor of many to sustain the privilege of a few. So, while the Minoans may have been ahead of their time in many ways, they were still playing by the age-old rules of social stratification. But let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. The Minoans were remarkable for their time, blending art, architecture, and administration in a way that set them apart from their contemporaries. Their palaces were not just stone and plaster. They were living, breathing entities that shaped and were shaped by the society that built them. They were the ultimate expression of a civilization that, for a time, was the envy of the ancient world. So, as we wander through the ruins and let our imaginations run wild, we're reminded that history is often more complex than it appears at first glance. The Minoan palaces, with all their splendor and sophistication, were not just monuments to human achievement. They were also reminders of the eternal dance of power and politics. And as we dig deeper into the story of the Minoans, we find that their legacy is not just one of architectural marvels, but also a testament to the enduring quest for balance between ambition and reality. As we wrap up this part of the journey, there's still plenty more to uncover. The story of the Minoans is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue and discovery. So, buckle up, because the ride is only just beginning, and the world of ancient Crete has plenty more secrets to reveal. As we delve into the final act of the Minoan saga, we find ourselves standing at the precipice of their decline, a historical drama that could rival any Shakespearean tragedy. The Minoan civilization, once the dazzling jewel of the Aegean, began to fade from the historical stage around 1450 BCE. Scholars have been scratching their heads for centuries, piecing together the puzzle of this sudden downturn. Was it a natural disaster, an economic collapse, or perhaps a bit of both? Let's start with the real scene stealer, the volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, now known as Santorini. Picture this, a volcanic blast so powerful it could have made Vesuvius look like a sputtering campfire. Around 1600 BCE, this event unleashed a torrent of ash and pumice that blanketed the region, possibly wreaking havoc on the Minoan economy and agricultural base. The collapse of their agricultural output would have been a catastrophic blow, akin to waking up one morning and finding out that coffee and Wi-Fi no longer exist. But before we pin the entire blame on Thera, let's consider other factors. You see, the Minoans were not just passive victims of natural disasters. There are compelling theories suggesting that their downfall was also a result of economic and political shifts. By 1450 BCE, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece had taken a keen interest in the Minoan way of life. Think of them as the original cultural appropriators, but with more swords and fewer hashtags. The Mycenaeans, with their militaristic society, weren't just admiring Minoan frescoes. They were also eyeing their trade networks and strategic locations. Economic downturns likely played a role as well. Remember that Minoan economy driven by olive oil and trade? Well, imagine if suddenly their key markets dried up or were overtaken by competitors. The Minoans might have found themselves in a financial pinch, unable to maintain their sprawling palaces and vast trade networks. It's like running a luxury resort in the middle of a desert with no tourists in sight, a recipe for disaster. And let's not forget seismic activity. Crete's position on the tectonic boundary meant that earthquakes were about as rare as a sunny day in Greece. A series of tremors could have easily weakened their already stressed infrastructure, leading to a domino effect of destruction and decline. The Minoans, who had once danced with the gods of engineering, found themselves at the mercy of Mother Nature's whims. As the Minoans' influence waned, the Mycenaeans moved in like a corporate takeover, absorbing Minoan culture and repackaging it with their own twist. It's kind of like when your favorite indie band signs with a major label and suddenly starts sounding suspiciously mainstream. The Mycenaeans adopted Minoan art, architecture, and even aspects of their writing system, Linear A, which they transformed into Linear B. Talk about the ultimate rebranding. But what of the legacy of Minoan architecture, you ask? Well, the Minoans left behind more than ruins and myths. Their architectural innovations, from multi-story buildings to advanced plumbing, laid the groundwork for future civilizations. The Greeks, and later the Romans, borrowed heavily from Minoan design principles. The use of open courtyards and sophisticated water management systems were concepts that would echo through the ages, influencing architectural styles long after the Minoans themselves had faded into history. In a way, the Minoans were the unsung heroes of ancient architecture, their innovations quietly shaping the built environment of the Mediterranean for centuries to come. And as we trace their influence forward through time, we find echoes of their genius in unexpected places, like the way we still manage to get lost in the labyrinthine aisles of an IKEA store. Perhaps this is the ultimate testament to the Minoan legacy. They created spaces that were both functional and bewildering, a reflection of the complex world they inhabited. So, as we close the book on the Minoans, we're left with a civilization that was as enigmatic as their undeciphered script. They were innovators, traders, and builders whose legacy continues to intrigue and inspire. The Minoans remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry of human endeavor and ingenuity. And as we walk through the ruins of Knossos, we are reminded that even in decline, there is beauty and power in what remains. The Minoans, with all their complexity and contradictions, leave us with a legacy that is as rich as it is enduring, a testament to the eternal quest for balance between ambition and reality. And there you have it, a civilization that rose, thrived, and eventually fell, leaving behind stories and structures that continue to captivate us. Whether they were navigating the treacherous waters of trade or building palaces that could withstand the wrath of the earth, the Minoans were nothing if not resilient. Their story is a reminder of the delicate dance between human ambition and the forces of nature, a dance that continues to play out in our world today. So, as you ponder the mysteries of the Minoan civilization, remember that history is not just about the past. It's a reflection of our own journey, a journey filled with twists, turns, and the occasional minotaur. In the sticky, swampy landscapes of what we now call the Gulf of Mexico, the Olmec civilization was busy laying down the roots of Mesoamerican culture around 1400 BCE. No, they weren't just sculpting those colossal stone heads that looked like they could stare right through your soul. They were doing something more mundane but critical, building a society that would influence cultures for millennia. The Olmecs were nestled in a region that made the Amazon rainforest look like a walk in the park. Think lush jungles, fertile floodplains, and enough mosquitoes to make you consider a life of perpetual indoors. The geography was both a blessing and a curse. Sure, the fertile soil was great for agriculture, allowing crops like maize to flourish. But the swampy terrain was also a breeding ground for those winged buskillers. And let's be honest, the real rulers of this land were the mosquitoes, not the Olmec elite. You could say that the Olmec had a love-hate relationship with their environment. It provided the resources they needed, but it was also a constant reminder that nature had a wicked sense of humor. In this land of extremes, the Olmec social structure was as layered as a wedding cake. At the top sat the elites, probably sitting pretty in their feathered finery, sipping some early form of hot chocolate. Because yes, cacao was a thing even back then. These were the people who could afford to keep their hands dirt-free. They were the movers and shakers, possibly connected to religious or political leadership, which in ancient terms often meant they were considered pretty tight with the gods. Beneath them, the artisans and traders carved out their niche, both literally and figuratively. They were the ones who chiseled those famous colossal heads and traded obsidian, jade, and other valuables. These folks had skills that were crucial to the economy, but didn't quite put them in the lap of luxury. Then there were the farmers, the unsung heroes of the Olmec world. Imagine waking up every day knowing your job was to feed a civilization, and not with a tractor and combine harvester, but with a trusty stone hoe and pure elbow grease. These were the people who turned the swampy landscape into a breadbasket, or more accurately, a maize basket. Without them, the Olmecs would have been more of a footnote in history, likely remembered only for their impressive workout routine of mosquito swiping. This social structure wasn't just about who got to wear the fanciest feathers. It was a complex web of dependencies and contributions. The elites needed the farmers to feed them, the artisans to glorify them, and the traders to enrich them. In return, the farmers got, well, they got to keep farming. But such was life in ancient times, where the hierarchy wasn't just a suggestion, but a way of life enforced by tradition, and perhaps a little divine intimidation. Despite being the ones doing all the heavy lifting, the farmers were the backbone of Olmec society. Their labor ensured that the elites could focus on more important tasks, like deciding which god needed appeasing next, or which neighboring tribe needed a good talking to, or conquering, if diplomacy didn't work out. And while the elites were busy with their ceremonial duties, the farmers were out there braving the elements, battling the jungle, and probably cursing the mosquitoes in a language we can only imagine. The Olmec civilization was more than just a collection of giant heads and agricultural prowess. It was a complex society with a hierarchical structure that kept the wheels turning. The elites might have been the face of the civilization, quite literally, if you consider the stone heads, but it was the laborers and artisans who were the real engine. They didn't get the glory or the fancy titles, but they got the satisfaction of a hard day's work and the knowledge that they were sustaining something greater than themselves. So, next time you think about the Olmec, remember that while the elites were busy playing politics and pretending to chat with gods, the farmers were out there doing the dirty work, keeping the civilization alive one maize stalk at a time. They might not have had the power or the prestige, but they had the grit to thrive in a land that seemed determined to test their every limit. And if that's not a legacy worth remembering, then what is? While the Olmec farmers were busy keeping the civilization's pantry stocked, the elites were up to something that could rival the most dramatic soap opera plotlines, maintaining a political structure that was as much about divine drama as it was about daily governance. Picture this: Olmec rulers strutting around like ancient rock stars, only their fan base was convinced they had a direct line to the gods. No Instagram followers here, folks. These leaders were living legends, their power cemented through a heady mix of charisma, religious influence, and maybe a sprinkle of orchestrated celestial pyrotechnics. Now, let's dive into the Olmec political stage, where the rulers played their roles with the flair of a Shakespearean actor. These leaders weren't just bureaucratic suits. They were seen as semi-divine figures, the earthly representatives of the gods. Think of them as ancient influencers, wielding the kind of power that could sway entire populations without the need for a single tweet. But don't be fooled by the glamour. Maintaining this image required more than just charisma and good lighting. The Olmec rulers were incredibly adept at combining spectacle with spirituality. Picture them orchestrating grand ceremonies that would make a Hollywood director envious, complete with elaborate rituals and displays of power designed to remind everyone who was in charge. These events weren't just about piety. They were strategic power plays, reinforcing their semi-divine status while keeping the populace in awe and perhaps a little fearful. The gods, it seemed, had a habit of manifesting their displeasure in the form of natural disasters, and who better to placate them than the rulers who claimed to have their ear? But how did they pull off this celestial circus with such aplomb? The answer lies in their ability to intertwine the political with the divine. They weren't just rulers. They were shrewd managers of perception. By associating themselves with the gods, they tapped into a timeless strategy. Fear and awe are a potent mix when it comes to control. Add a dash of religious dogma, and you've got a recipe for a society where questioning authority wasn't just discouraged, it was downright blasphemous. This blend of politics and religion wasn't just about maintaining control in the present. It was about leaving a legacy that would ripple through future Mesoamerican civilizations. The foundation they laid was robust enough to influence the likes of the Maya and Aztecs, who took the concept of divine rulership and ran with it, adding their own layers of complexity and grandeur. The Olmec were the original architects of this cultural blueprint, setting the stage for millennia of Mesoamerican tradition. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The harsh reality was that the Olmec political system, much like any power structure, had its dark underbelly. Maintaining this divine facade required a tight grip on dissent, and those who dared to challenge the status quo probably found themselves on the wrong end of a religious argument, or worse. It was a world where power was as much about perception as it was about politics, and the rulers had to be as deft in managing their subjects as they were in managing their divine image. In the grand scheme of things, the Olmec rulers' influence extended far beyond their own civilization. They set the bar for what it meant to be a leader in ancient Mesoamerica, a figurehead of divine authority, a master of spectacle, and a shrewd politician all rolled into one. Their legacy was a complex tapestry of myth and reality, a testament to the enduring power of charisma and the timeless allure of divine right. So, as we continue to unravel the layers of this ancient society, remember that the Olmec rulers weren't just historical footnotes. They were the original influencers, shaping the world around them with a mix of divine drama and political savvy. Their story is a reminder of the power of perception, the allure of myth, and the sometimes harsh reality that lies beneath the surface. And while they may have been long gone, their influence continues to echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of a well-crafted narrative. The Olmec rulers' knack for blending divine drama with political maneuvering is just one piece of the puzzle. Now, let's pivot to the nuts and bolts, or should we say maize and stone, of the Olmec economy. While the elites were busy dazzling the masses with their celestial charisma, the real magic was happening in the fields and marketplaces. So, let's talk about the Olmec's agricultural prowess and their knack for trade that would make even modern economists nod in approval. First, let's give a standing ovation to maize, the VIP of Olmec agriculture. Maize wasn't just a crop, it was the lifeblood of the civilization. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a universal remote, versatile and indispensable. The Olmec weren't just growing maize, they were practically singing hymns to it, and for good reason. It supported not just their diet but their economy. The fertile floodplains of the Gulf Coast were like Mother Nature's own all-you-can-eat buffet, allowing the Olmec to cultivate this golden grain with a proficiency that would make a modern-day farmer jealous. But the Olmec didn't put all their eggs in one maize basket. They also grew beans, squash, and chili peppers, creating a balanced diet that kept their civilization fueled and feisty. And let's not forget the cacao bean. Yes, even in ancient times, people knew the power of a good cup of hot chocolate. But these weren't just foodstuffs. They were commodities, currency in the barter system that drove the Olmec economy. Trading was an art form, and the Olmec were the Picassos of the Mesoamerican trade scene. They established vast networks that stretched as far as present-day Guatemala and Honduras. Imagine the traders navigating dense jungles and winding rivers, all in pursuit of obsidian, jade, and other precious goods. Talk about a commute. And these weren't just decorative trinkets. They were symbols of power and status, the ancient equivalent of driving a luxury car or flashing the latest smartphone. Now, if you're picturing these traders rolling along in chariots or wagons, think again. The Olmec accomplished all of this without the wheel. That's right. No wheels, just sheer human determination. It's a head-scratcher, really. How did they move those colossal heads, some weighing up to 50 tons, without modern engineering? Some say it was aliens. Others suggest it was the world's most intense cross-fit class. The reality, it was likely a combination of ingenuity and a whole lot of manpower. They probably used logs to roll these stone behemoths across the landscape, a method as old as time itself. The construction of ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta is another testament to their engineering genius. These weren't just places to hang out and chat with the guards. They were the heartbeat of Olmec society. Picture grand plazas surrounded by mounds and pyramids, all crafted with meticulous precision. These centers were the stage for religious rituals and political gatherings, making them the epicenter of Olmec life. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. The Olmec managed these feats without a written language as we understand it. That's right, no blueprints or instruction manuals, just oral tradition and a collective memory that would put an elephant to shame. And while their art and architecture are awe-inspiring, they also tell a story of a society that valued community over individual glory. So, how did all these elements, agriculture, trade, engineering, fit together in the Olmec economy? It was a complex dance of resources and relationships. The farmers produced the food that fed the laborers, who built the infrastructure that supported the traders, who brought in the goods that enriched the elites. It was an ecosystem of interdependence, where everyone had a role to play, whether they were tilling the soil or chiseling stone. But let's not romanticize it too much. This was a world where the whims of nature could undo years of hard work in a heartbeat. Droughts, floods, and even volcanic eruptions were constant threats, reminding the Olmec that no matter how sophisticated their society, they were still at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Yet, through it all, they persevered, adapting and evolving in ways that would leave a lasting legacy on the civilizations that followed. In the end, the Olmec economy was not just about survival. It was about creating a foundation for future greatness. They laid the groundwork for the Maya and Aztec economies that would come after them, shaping the course of Mesoamerican history. Their story is one of resilience and innovation, a testament to the power of human ingenuity in the face of adversity. As we continue unraveling the threads of this ancient tapestry, remember that the Olmec were more than just a footnote in history textbooks. They were pioneers, carving out a civilization in a world that seemed determined to test their every limit. So the next time you marvel at a piece of modern engineering or enjoy a bar of chocolate, give a nod to the Olmec, the original maestros of maize and masters of Mesoamerica. So, as we unravel the Olmec tapestry further, let's dive into the mysterious, slightly eerie world of their religion. It's a realm where the lines between humans and gods were as blurred as a modern photo taken without flash. At the heart of it all lies the word jaguar motif, a creature that might make you question just how much creative freedom ancient mythmakers had. Now, if you're wondering what a word jaguar is, imagine a mix between a jaguar and, well, a human. This isn't your typical fuzzy feline friend. No, the Olmec envisioned a creature with a snarling jaguar face and a human body, often portrayed in their art and sculptures. It's the kind of creature that would either make you want to run for the hills or bow down in reverence, depending on the context. But what did this beast symbolize? To the Olmec, the jaguar wasn't just a big cat. It was a symbol of power, fertility, and shamanistic abilities. This motif was more than just artistic flair. It was a representation of the divine right, an emblem of elite power. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of wearing a crown, except much cooler and infinitely more terrifying. The Olmec religion was a heady brew of animism, shamanism, and ancestor worship. The word jaguar encapsulated all these elements, serving as a bridge between the human and the divine. It was a symbol that legitimized the social hierarchy, giving the ruling elite the aura of divine authority. After all, who would dare question a leader who claimed kinship with such a fearsome deity? It was a political power move wrapped in religious significance, a strategy that would make Machiavelli proud. This religious motif was more than just symbolic posturing. It played a crucial role in societal cohesion. Rituals involving the word jaguar were likely community events, drawing people together in shared belief and practice. There were moments when the everyday grind of farming and trading took a back seat to the spectacle of divine drama. And let's face it, in a world where entertainment options were limited, a good ritual was probably the highlight of the social calendar. Now, let's talk rituals. The Olmec were the masters of ceremony, and their religious practices were as elaborate as they were enigmatic. Imagine priests donning jaguar pelts and masks, performing rituals that were part theater, part spiritual journey. These ceremonies were designed to appease the gods, ensure bountiful harvests, and maintain societal order. They were the glue that held the community together, providing a sense of continuity and shared purpose. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. These rituals weren't just about the present. They were a way of passing down cultural traditions, ensuring that the next generation understood their place within the cosmic order. Through these practices, the Olmec transmitted their values and beliefs, creating a cultural legacy that would resonate through the ages. It was a way of saying, we were here, and our story matters. Of course, not everyone was thrilled to be part of these religious spectacles. For the average farmer or artisan, the rituals might have felt like just another obligation, a reminder of their place in the social pecking order. But participation was non-negotiable. It was a civic duty wrapped in spiritual significance. And while the elites reaped the benefits of their divine connections, the common folk were left to ponder the mysteries of the universe, or at least try to decipher the priest's latest sermon. In the grand scheme of things, the Olmec religious system was a sophisticated blend of myth and reality, a testament to the power of belief in shaping human societies. It was a world where the supernatural and the mundane coexisted, each reinforcing the other in a delicate dance of faith and power. And while the word jaguar might seem like a fantastical relic of the past, its symbolism speaks to a universal human desire for connection with something greater than ourselves. So, as we continue to explore the Olmec civilization, remember that their religion was more than just a collection of strange rituals and mythical creatures. It was a living, breathing part of their society, a force that shaped their world in ways both profound and practical. And while we may never fully understand the mysteries of their beliefs, we can appreciate the legacy they left behind, a legacy of faith, power, and the enduring allure of the divine. The Olmec religion was more than just a collection of strange rituals and mythical creatures. It was a living, breathing part of their society, a force that shaped their world in ways both profound and practical. And while we may never fully understand the mysteries of their beliefs, we can appreciate the legacy they left behind, a legacy of faith, power, and the enduring allure of the divine. Now, as we turn the page on the Olmec saga, let's delve into the less glamorous but equally captivating chapter of their decline around 400 BCE. The decline of a civilization. It's the stuff of historical drama, often painted with broad strokes of catastrophe and sudden collapse. But let's put the brakes on those Hollywood fantasies. The Olmec didn't just vanish overnight like an ancient Snapchat story. No, their decline was more like a gradual unwinding, a slow fade rather than a dramatic blackout. We're not talking about one cataclysmic event, but a series of shifts that eventually led to their cultural eclipse. So, what happened to the Olmec? Well, let's start with the environment, because Mother Nature has always liked to keep humanity on its toes. Around 400 BCE, the Olmec heartland experienced some serious ecological changes. Imagine a combination of soil depletion and climate shifts, turning those fertile floodplains into a less-than-ideal agricultural paradise. Suddenly, the land that had once been their greatest asset was more like a frenemy with a grudge. As agriculture waned, so did the Olmec's economic might. The trade networks they had so meticulously woven began to unravel. Without the steady flow of goods, their cities, if you can call them that, lost their luster. San Lorenzo and La Venta, once bustling centers of commerce and ceremony, gradually emptied as people sought greener pastures. But wait, it wasn't just the environment playing hardball. The Olmec also faced internal pressures. Their political system, built on the divine right of semi-godly rulers, was only as stable as the faith of the people. And let's face it, when the crops fail, and the gods seem to be giving you the cold shoulder, even the most devout might start questioning their leaders' celestial connections. Cue the rise of dissent and the slow erosion of centralized authority. Now, don't get me wrong, the Olmec didn't go down without leaving a mark. Their cultural DNA seeped into neighboring civilizations like a really persistent meme. The Maya and Aztecs picked up where the Olmec left off, borrowing their religious motifs, political structures, and artistic flair. It's like the Olmec passed the baton in the relay race of Mesoamerican history, only it was a baton carved from jade and adorned with jaguar motifs. And speaking of those jaguar faces, let's not forget the enduring mystery of the colossal stone heads. Weighing in at up to 50 tons, these stone giants have kept archaeologists scratching their heads for years. They stand as silent witnesses to a civilization that once thrived, each one with a face as enigmatic as the Mona Lisa. Theories about their purpose abound, from depictions of rulers to representations of deities. But perhaps the real magic lies in their ability to captivate our imagination, inviting us to ponder the lives and times of the Olmec. As we reflect on the Olmec's legacy, it's clear that their story offers a treasure trove of lessons on the rise and fall of societies. Their decline teaches us that no civilization, no matter how advanced, is immune to the whims of nature and the complexities of human dynamics. It's a reminder that the foundations of power are often more fragile than they appear, and that adaptability is the real currency of survival. In the end, the Olmec story is a testament to the resilience of human culture. They may have faded from the forefront, but their influence continues to echo through the ages. From their pioneering spirit to their artistic achievements, they laid the groundwork for the civilizations that followed. The Olmec didn't just carve stone heads, they carved a place in history, proving that even in decline, a civilization can leave an indelible legacy. So, as we close this chapter on the Olmec, let's carry forward the lessons they've left us. In a world where change is the only constant, perhaps the greatest tribute we can pay to these ancient innovators is to embrace their spirit of adaptation and resilience. After all, in the grand theater of history, it's not always the strongest who endure, but those who can evolve in the face of adversity. In the bustling streets of Alexandria around 360 AD, a young girl named Hypatia was navigating a world that was, quite literally, the center of the universe, at least in terms of intellectual pursuit. Alexandria was a city where ideas flowed more freely than the Nile itself, and Hypatia was right at the heart of it all. Now, if you're thinking of Alexandria as some sleepy ancient town, let me set you straight. This place was nothing short of a cosmopolitan hub, a melting pot where Greek, Egyptian, and Roman cultures collided in a cacophony of scholarly debates and the occasional philosophical throwdown. Hypatia was born into a world where her father, Theon of Alexandria, was already a big deal in the mathematics department. Think of Theon as the kind of dad who wouldn't just tell you that 2 + 2 = 4. He'd make sure you understood the entire Pythagorean theorem before breakfast. Theon was a mathematician and philosopher who believed his daughter could do anything the boys could do, maybe even better. The apple didn't just fall close to the tree in this case. It practically rolled back up the trunk. And then there was the Library of Alexandria, the ancient world's version of the internet, minus the memes and cat videos, but with just as much drama. It was a place where scrolls outnumbered people, and ideas were exchanged faster than rumors at a high school reunion. We're talking about a collection of knowledge so extensive that it aimed to have a copy of every book ever written. Imagine trying to collect every tweet ever sent today. Madness. Hypatia grew up surrounded by this intellectual wealth, with access to the brightest minds and the sharpest quills of her time. Her education was intensive, covering subjects from mathematics to astronomy, philosophy to the occasional astrological prediction. Her father ensured she had the best tutors, turning their home into a mini version of the library itself, where discussions were as rich as the Mediterranean diet. But let's talk about the myth of Hypatia's beauty, because oh boy, does history love to romanticize. Some accounts describe her as this drop-dead, gorgeous philosopher, as if to suggest that her looks were her most notable feature. Here's the kicker. In the ancient world, if you were a woman who stood out, you might as well have had a neon sign flashing, "Look at me," hanging over your head. Yet in reality, her intellectual prowess was what truly shone, and that's the real story worth telling. Ancient accounts like those by Socrates, Scholasticus, and Damasius often focus on her wisdom and virtue, leaving her supposed beauty as an afterthought. In a society where women were often relegated to the background, Hypatia wasn't just making waves. She was practically a tsunami. She became a leading thinker in a city already overflowing with ideas and knowledge. While others were still figuring out how to make fire, she was busy teaching complex mathematical concepts and astronomical theories, leaving the rest of us mere mortals somewhat in awe. So, let's ditch the myth of Hypatia as just another pretty face in history's yearbook. She was a trailblazer, an intellectual powerhouse who challenged societal norms and dared to be more than the sum of her parts. Her story is one of brilliance, courage, and the occasional eyebrow-raising moment, like when she reportedly refused a marriage proposal by showing her suitor a bloody rag to demonstrate the realities of womanhood. Talk about setting the bar high for rejecting unwanted advances. In short, Hypatia was a force to be reckoned with in ancient Alexandria, a city that was as much about its politics and power struggles as it was about its scholarly pursuits. She lived in a time when the world was changing rapidly, and she embraced it with the kind of grace and intellect that made her legendary. Her story is not just about what she looked like or how she dressed, but about the incredible mind that left an indelible mark on history. Navigating the intellectual highways of Alexandria, Hypatia wasn't just any scholar. She was the head honcho of the Neoplatonist school, a kind of ancient TED talk circuit, minus the overpriced tickets and Instagram influencers. Imagine a think tank where philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers gathered to exchange ideas like an intellectual swap meet. Hypatia was at the center of this cerebral hurricane, orchestrating discussions that could have put any modern-day panel to shame. Now, before you picture a bunch of toga-clad geeks sitting around debating the meaning of life, know that Neoplatonism was serious business. This wasn't just some abstract philosophical mumbo-jumbo. It was a school of thought that attempted to explain the nature of reality itself. Hypatia taught that everything emanates from the One, an ineffable source of all existence. It's like saying the universe is one giant cosmic burrito, and we're all just different layers of beans and cheese. Her teachings weren't limited to philosophy, though. Hypatia had her fingers in more intellectual pies than a baker at a math convention. Mathematics was her playground, and she wasn't just reciting multiplication tables. We're talking advanced geometry and algebra that would have made your high school math teacher weep with envy. She also dabbled in astronomy, charting the stars and planets with the precision of an ancient astronomer who could have given Carl Sagan a run for his money. Her students, well, they were the original nerd squad. Imagine a group of eager scholars hanging on her every word, scribbling notes faster than a court stenographer on double espresso. Among them was Synesius of Cyrene, who later became a bishop, proving that even back then, nerds had a way of infiltrating the establishment. Synesius credited Hypatia with teaching him everything from geometry to the intricacies of the human soul, a curriculum that would make any modern university look like child's play. But Hypatia didn't just stop at teaching. She was an inventor, too. Take the astrolabe, for instance, a nifty gadget that allowed users to chart the positions of stars and planets. Think of it as the ancient world's version of Google Maps, but instead of finding the nearest coffee shop, it helped navigate the celestial sphere. And then there was the hydrometer, a device for measuring the density of liquids. Picture a more sophisticated way to figure out if your wine was watered down, because even back then, nobody wanted to be shortchanged on their vintage. So, why does this all matter? Well, Hypatia's contributions were more than just academic exercises. They were tools that shaped the understanding of the universe. Her inventions and teachings laid groundwork that would influence scholars for centuries. She was the Steve Jobs of her era, innovative, boundary-pushing, and maybe a bit intimidating, but without the black turtleneck and corporate boardroom drama. Meanwhile, the socio-political climate was anything but tranquil. The sands of Alexandria were shifting, not just metaphorically but literally, as the Roman Empire grappled with the rise of Christianity. This was a time when being a pagan philosopher was akin to being a vinyl record collector in the age of Spotify, endearing but increasingly out of step with the times. Hypatia's world was one caught between old beliefs and new dogmas, a tug-of-war between the classical and the Christian. To say the transition was smooth would be like claiming that the Titanic had a minor boating mishap. Christianity was gaining traction, and with it came a new hierarchy of power and influence. The temples of old gods were being replaced with churches, and intellectuals like Hypatia found themselves navigating a landscape where their ideas were not just debated, but often deemed heretical. It was a world where being a free thinker could land you in hot water faster than you could say Neoplatonism. Yet, despite the odds, Hypatia remained a beacon of knowledge and reason. Her lectures were attended by pagans and Christians alike, a testament to her ability to transcend the divisive lines of faith and politics. But let's not romanticize too much. This was also a time when alliances were as fickle as the Mediterranean weather. The same people applauding her wisdom could easily turn against her when the political winds shifted. In essence, Hypatia's life was a masterclass in intellectual resilience amidst a backdrop of cultural upheaval. She didn't just survive in a man's world. She thrived, challenging norms and pushing the boundaries of what a scholar could achieve. Her story, however, isn't just a tale of triumph. It's a reminder of the precarious balance between knowledge and power, a dance as delicate as it is dangerous. So while we marvel at Hypatia's legacy, let's remember the harsh reality she faced. Her brilliance was undeniable, but it existed in a world where the stakes were high and the game was ruthless. As the sands of Alexandria continued to shift, so too did the fortunes of those who dared to think differently. But for now, let's leave Hypatia in her rightful place among the stars, a shining example of what it means to illuminate the world with the light of knowledge. Stay tuned, because her story isn't over just yet. As the sun continued to rise over the skyline of Alexandria, casting its golden hue on the city's bustling streets, Hypatia's life was about to intersect with the political drama of her age. Her classroom was not just a sanctuary of learning, but a crucible where the city's elite would often find themselves drawn into her gravitational pull. Among these was Orsts, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, whose friendship with Hypatia would put her smack in the middle of a political maelstrom. Now, Orsts wasn't just any bureaucrat. This guy was the real deal, the Roman Empire's representative in a city that was more a boiling pot of cultural and religious tensions than a peaceful outpost. Think of him as the governor of a territory that was constantly teetering on the edge of chaos, with varying factions vying for control. His connection to Hypatia was more than just political schmoozing. It was based on mutual respect and admiration for her intellect. In a world where alliances shifted like the sands beneath Alexandria's streets, their friendship was a bastion of stability, or so it seemed. Hypatia's role as an influencer in this high-stakes game wasn't by design, but rather a consequence of her erudition and charisma. She became a trusted advisor to Orsts, offering counsel on matters that extended beyond the realm of academia. Her influence wasn't wielded with the iron fist of a dictator, but rather with the subtlety of a philosopher. Her words were like arrows, precise and penetrating, aimed at the heart of complex issues that plagued the city. But in a city where political and religious tensions were as palpable as the salty Mediterranean air, this was a double-edged sword. Speaking of tensions, let's set the scene. Christianity was on the rise, gaining followers faster than a cat video goes viral. Its ascendancy was not just a religious movement, but a tectonic shift in societal structures. The old pagan ways, with their pantheon of gods, were being replaced by a monotheistic worldview that threatened the intellectual elite's traditional power base. Alexandria was a city divided, with Christians and pagans jostling for position in a cultural tug-of-war that made Hypatia's position precarious. Hypatia's status as a pagan philosopher was both a badge of honor and a potential target on her back. While she was revered by many for her knowledge, others saw her as a relic of a bygone era clinging to outdated beliefs. Yet Hypatia, ever the diplomat, managed to maintain a following that crossed religious lines. Her lectures attracted both pagans and Christians, a testament to her ability to bridge divides with the universal language of reason and inquiry. But let's not kid ourselves here. In an environment as volatile as Alexandria, being a unifying figure came with its own set of risks. Hypatia's popularity and influence made her an object of envy as well as admiration. If you think envy is just a petty emotion, consider this. In the ancient world, it was a potent catalyst for conflict. She was caught in a crossfire between Orsts and Cyril, the fiery bishop of Alexandria, whose views on Christianity were as uncompromising as a Roman centurion's armor. Cyril, a man with ambitions as grand as his sermons were lengthy, saw Hypatia as a threat to his authority. Her proximity to Orsts only fueled his suspicions, as he believed that her pagan teachings were undermining his efforts to consolidate Christian power in the city. What followed was a collision course that had all the makings of a drama-filled plot, straight out of a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons, but with all the political intrigue and betrayal one could ask for. The tensions between Cyril and Orsts eventually escalated to a point where Alexandria was on the brink of civil unrest. It was a classic power struggle, one that pitted ecclesiastical ambition against secular governance. Hypatia, despite her attempts to stay above the fray, found herself pulled into this vortex. Her very existence became a symbol of the old world, a world Cyril was eager to dismantle. Yet the irony here is as thick as the smoke from a burning incense stick. Hypatia, who spent her life unraveling the mysteries of the universe, was now tangled in the most earthly of conflicts, one of power, influence, and survival. Her story serves as a poignant reminder that even the brightest minds can become pawns in a game played by those wielding authority like a double-edged sword. As the political chessboard of Alexandria shifted, Hypatia's position became increasingly precarious. Her friendship with Orsts, once a source of strength, now marked her as an ally of a man at odds with the church's ambitions. It was a time when allegiances were as fleeting as a summer breeze, and Hypatia's neutral intellectual stance was seen as a form of resistance to the rising tide of religious dogma. While her teachings continued to inspire, they also painted a target on her back. The cultural tug-of-war she navigated was not just an academic exercise, but a life-and-death struggle. Her story, filled with brilliance and tragedy, is a testament to the enduring clash between knowledge and power, a dance as delicate as the sands of time shifting beneath the weight of history. For now, let's leave Hypatia standing on the precipice of this unfolding drama, a beacon of wisdom in a world engulfed by the shadows of political ambition and religious fervor. Her tale isn't over. It's merely at a crossroads, with forces beyond her control poised to alter the course of her life. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be as turbulent and gripping as the world she inhabited. As the precarious dance of power continued in Alexandria, Hypatia found herself teetering on the edge of an abyss that would soon swallow her brilliant career and, tragically, her life. Her friendship with Orsts, the Roman prefect, had become more of a liability than an asset in the city's cutthroat political arena, where alliances shifted as unpredictably as the Mediterranean tides. Now, let's talk about 415 AD, a year that would go down in history for all the wrong reasons. The Christian bishop Cyril, a man not known for his subtlety, had been steadily tightening his grip on Alexandria, eager to transform the city into a bastion of Christian orthodoxy. Hypatia, with her pagan roots and connections to Orsts, stood as a glaring reminder of the old order Cyril sought to dismantle. She was like an ancient academic rock star, surrounded by an entourage of devoted students, yet also shadowed by those who saw her as a threat to their newfound religious monopoly. The political climate was harder than a midsummer's day in the Egyptian desert. Tensions between Orsts and Cyril had escalated to a boiling point, with Hypatia caught right in the middle. It was an ugly clash of secular authority versus ecclesiastical ambition, and unfortunately, Hypatia's intellectual neutrality was perceived as a form of dissent. Her lectures, once a beacon of enlightenment, were now scrutinized for any trace of subversion. Enter the Christian mob, a group of zealous followers whipped into a frenzy by the fiery rhetoric of their leaders. On a fateful day in March, they decided to take matters into their own hands, believing they were ridding Alexandria of a pagan influence. Armed with a misguided sense of divine justice, they cornered Hypatia on her way home, likely from one of her renowned lectures. In a scene that starkly contrasts with the romanticized image of Hypatia as a serene philosopher, these men, driven by fanaticism and political manipulation, brutally murdered her. Let's bust the myth right here. Hypatia's death was not some noble martyrdom for science and reason. It was a calculated act of political violence, an attempt to silence a voice that stood inconveniently outside the rising wave of Christian orthodoxy. Her murder wasn't just a crime. It was a strategic move to consolidate power, a grim reminder of how lethal the mix of politics and religion can be. The reality was grisly. Hypatia was dragged from her chariot, stripped of her clothes, and beaten savagely. According to some accounts, she was flayed with ostraka, sharp pottery shards, before her body was dismembered and burned. It was a public spectacle meant to send a message. The old ways were dying, and with them, any resistance to the New World Order. In the aftermath, Alexandria's intellectual landscape was irrevocably altered. Hypatia's death marked a turning point, a chilling reminder that the pursuit of knowledge was now subject to the whims of religious orthodoxy. The city that had once been a cradle of scholarly pursuit, where ideas were exchanged more freely than a marketplace trinket, was now a place where questioning the dominant narrative could cost you your life. Economically, this shift was significant. Alexandria had thrived as a hub of learning and commerce, attracting scholars and traders alike. But with the tightening grip of religious control came a stifling of the intellectual freedom that had been the city's lifeblood. The flow of ideas was curtailed, and with it, the vibrant exchange that had fueled Alexandria's growth. Let's not sugarcoat it. Hypatia's murder was a dark chapter in the city's storied history, a testament to the destructive power of intolerance. Yet, the romantic narratives surrounding her death often miss the point. She wasn't just a tragic heroine. She was a victim of a brutal power struggle, caught between forces that cared little for her intellect and more for the control it represented. In the grand tapestry of history, Hypatia's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fanaticism and the fragility of intellectual freedom. Her death was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger trend that saw the gradual decline of the classical world's intellectual traditions. The sands of time have since obscured many details, but the grim reality remains. Hypatia was silenced not by reason, but by raw, unchecked power. But before we wrap up this chapter, let's not forget the poignant irony. Hypatia, who dedicated her life to understanding the cosmos and the intricacies of human thought, was ultimately undone by the basest of human instincts: fear, envy, and the relentless pursuit of power. Her story, while tragic, is also a testament to the enduring spirit of inquiry. Despite the darkness that enveloped her final days, her legacy endures, a flickering torch passed down through the ages to those who dare to seek knowledge, regardless of the cost. As we leave Hypatia in this somber moment, remember that her influence stretched far beyond the boundaries of Alexandria and the constraints of her time. Her life and death are a stark reminder of the perils faced by those who challenge the status quo and the enduring struggle between enlightenment and ignorance. Stay tuned, because the echoes of Hypatia's voice continue to resonate, inspiring future generations to question, to learn, and to stand firm in the face of adversity. So here we are, standing at the crossroads of history, where the echoes of Hypatia's voice ripple through the ages, defying the silence that tried to snuff them out. After her brutal end in 415 AD, you'd think the story would fade into the dusty corners of forgotten scrolls. But no. Hypatia's legacy is like a cat with 9 lives, popping up in the most unexpected places, from the Enlightenment salons of Europe to the feminist marches of the 21st century. Let's start with the Enlightenment, that grand intellectual awakening where reason was the new black, and everyone was obsessed with shining a spotlight on the dark ages of ignorance. Think of it as the era when humans collectively decided that thinking was cool again. Hypatia was reimagined as a martyr for science and rational thought, a symbol standing defiantly against the tide of superstition. Voltaire, that French philosopher with a penchant for sarcasm sharper than a guillotine, referenced Hypatia to critique the oppressive power of religious institutions. He wasn't alone. Enlightenment thinkers latched onto Hypatia's story like a lifebuoy, using her as a symbol to champion the cause of reason over dogma. Fast forward to the 19th century, and Hypatia's tale gets a romantic makeover. Enter Charles Kingsley, a Victorian novelist who penned a fictionalized account of her life. His book, simply titled Hypatia, turns her into a tragic heroine, a misunderstood genius caught in the brutal machinery of religious fanaticism. Kingsley's work was more fiction than fact, but it resonated with audiences, feeding the myth of Hypatia as a lone beacon of wisdom extinguished by ignorance. This romanticized version of her story became a touchstone for those who saw parallels in their own struggles against societal constraints. Jump ahead to the 21st century, and Hypatia emerges yet again, this time as a feminist icon. In an age where gender equality is a rallying cry, her story is a poignant reminder of the obstacles women have faced, and continue to face, in pursuit of intellectual recognition. Here was a woman who shattered the glass ceiling of her time with the force of a meteorite, only to be undone by the very forces she sought to enlighten. Modern feminist scholarship has embraced Hypatia as a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and the courage to defy societal norms. But let's not get swept away in the romance of it all. The real Hypatia was a complex figure, living in a world where the stakes were higher than a philosopher's brow after a particularly knotty problem. Her life was not just a tale of intellectual triumph, but a stark reminder of the perils faced by those who stand against the prevailing currents of their time. The myths and truths about her life have intertwined over the centuries, creating a tapestry rich in color yet frayed at the edges with embellishments. Why does this matter? Because Hypatia's story is not just ancient history, it's a narrative that continues to be relevant today. It's about the ongoing struggle between ignorance and enlightenment, a battle as old as civilization itself. In an age where misinformation can spread faster than a cat video, the lessons of Hypatia's life remind us of the importance of critical thought and the courage to question the status quo. Despite the centuries, the economic and political realities that shaped her life are eerily familiar. The clash between secular and religious powers, the tension between tradition and progress, the societal structures that elevate some while marginalizing others. These are not just relics of the past, but ongoing dynamics in the modern world. Hypatia's life, therefore, is not just a story of what was, but a reflection on what continues to be. In wrapping up, let's reflect on the enduring legacy of this remarkable woman. Hypatia's influence stretches far beyond the marble columns of ancient Alexandria. She stands as a testament to the power of knowledge and the resilience of the human spirit against the tides of ignorance. Her life and untimely death serve as a powerful reminder that while the pursuit of enlightenment is fraught with peril, it is also an endeavor that defines our very humanity. So, in the grand tapestry of history, Hypatia's story is a thread of brilliance woven through the fabric of time, a narrative that challenges us to think deeply, to question freely, and to never shy away from the pursuit of truth. Her legacy is a beacon, lighting the way for future generations who dare to seek knowledge and stand firm in the face of adversity. As we close the book on Hypatia, let's carry forward the torch she lit, keeping her spirit alive as a guiding light in our own journeys towards enlightenment. They say the gods of ancient Sumer had a monopoly on everything, from the sky to the grain harvest. After all, why bother with free will when you can have a divine board meeting in the heavens deciding the fate of your barley field? It wasn't just about appeasing a pantheon with names like Anu and Enlil that sound like they could headline a prog rock band, but a full-blown celestial economy. His gods were less concerned with hurling thunderbolts and more interested in making sure the wheat grew tall and the rivers obeyed their course. Sumer, sitting pretty between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, wasn't just the cradle of civilization. It was also the birthplace of a religious assembly line. If you think modern religions have a lot of deities, Sumerians would raise you a pantheon of hundreds. Anu was the big guy, the sky god, the CEO of the divine corporation. Then there was Enlil, the storm god, who apparently had a side gig as a wind machine operator. In a world where the line between supernatural and everyday life was as blurry as a Sumerian clay tablet, these deities held the keys to the kingdom of agriculture, politics, and everything in between. Now, let's talk about the practicalities. You might think worship was all about incense and chanting, but for the Sumerians, it was more like running a religious franchise. Temples were not just spiritual centers, they were the heart of economic life. The ziggurat, a massive bricklayer cake of a building, was both a holy place and a bustling hub of activity. Picture priests doubling as accountants, keeping strict tabs on the temple's assets. And we're not just talking spiritual currency here. Cattle, grain, and craft goods flowed through these sacred walls like an ancient version of Amazon. The temple's role was indispensable, acting as both a bank and a welfare system. It wasn't just about divine favor. No, the guards had a much more practical interest, ensuring that the harvest was bountiful and the city-state thrived. If the wheat didn't grow, it wasn't just a bad season. It was a sign of divine disapproval, like getting a cosmic thumbs down. So, the Sumerians engaged in a bit of divine insurance, offering sacrifices and tithes to keep those celestial shareholders happy. Speaking of keeping people happy, the temples had a nifty setup. They owned vast tracts of land, essentially running a mini-economy within the city. The priests, who were part-time farmers and full-time divine intermediaries, ensured that the guards were kept in the loop with the latest grain statistics. The temple was the go-to place for loans and seed distribution, doubling as a seed bank and credit union. If you think your banker has too much power, try negotiating a loan with a priest who claims divine backing, and there was no escaping this divine influence. Every city-state had its patron deity, a kind of spiritual mascot, if you will. Uruk had Anu, and Nippur had Enlil. These guards weren't just distant figures in the sky, they were intimately tied to the city's fortunes. The kings, who might have fancied themselves as big shots, had to play nice with the temple authorities. After all, it was the priests who could interpret the will of the guards, and nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of a divine verdict. In the grand tapestry of Sumerian life, religion was the thread that tied everything together. It was woven into the very fabric of society, from the daily grind of agriculture to the lofty ambitions of kings and priests. The Sumerians understood that, in a world where nature could be capricious and unpredictable, having a divine ally, or several hundred, was a smart move. They might have lived thousands of years ago, but their approach to religion and society was as complex and nuanced as anything we've got today. This intricate dance between humans and the divine wasn't just about blind faith or mystical visions. It was about survival, prosperity, and ensuring that the guards were on their side when the rivers flooded and the crops needed rain. The Sumerians knew that to navigate the uncertainties of life, they needed the favor of their deities, and they were willing to invest heavily in that cosmic relationship. So, the next time you think about the origins of religious practices, remember the Sumerians, who turned worship into an art form and an economic powerhouse. In the grand cosmic game of Sumerian life, religion wasn't just the referee. It was the whole playbook. If you've ever felt like you're just a cog in a machine, you have something in common with the Sumerian temple workers. The religious hierarchy mirrored the social ladder, with high priests perched at the top like managerial overlords, and the temple staff laboring below, keeping the divine factory lines rolling. The top dog, the high priest or En, wasn't just a spiritual leader. They were the Jeff Bezos of the ancient world, managing not just spiritual affairs, but also a booming economic empire. This hierarchical setup was no accident. Sumerians liked their guards organized, and they applied the same logic to their religious institutions. Think of it as a divine corporate structure, where each guard had a department, and the high priest was the CEO, ensuring the heavenly directives were carried out down to the last clay tablet. The lower ranks, the priests and temple workers, were the middle management and employee bees, handling everything from sacrifices to accounting. And yes, they had accountants. Sumerians took record-keeping seriously, making sure every goat and grain was accounted for. The temples weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic powerhouses. Picture the ziggurat, a multi-tiered temple, as the ancient equivalent of a skyscraper filled with bustling activity. These weren't just places for kneeling and praying, they were the Wall Street of Sumer. Temples owned swaths of land and had their own workforce, producing everything from textiles to pottery. Let's not forget the livestock. Temple herds were a sign of wealth and divine favor. Temples even functioned as early banks, where grain was deposited and loans were made. Imagine going to your local temple to cash in your paycheck in barley. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't all incense and enlightenment. The temples held significant political sway. They were the kingmakers of the city-states, able to influence rulers through divine mandates and religious endorsements. Kings had to tread carefully around the temple authorities, lest they find themselves on the receiving end of a divine smiting, or more realistically, a politically expedient prophecy. The priests could interpret the will of the guards, and their interpretations often conveniently aligned with their own interests. And speaking of interests, let's talk taxes, not the IRS kind, but divine taxation. Sumerian religion had its own version of tithes, the bala, which wasn't just a suggested donation, but a mandatory contribution. This wasn't just about keeping the gods happy, it was about maintaining the temple's economic grip. Temples collected a portion of the harvest and livestock, ensuring a steady flow of resources. You might think of it as a divine cover charge. You pay up to keep the cosmic bouncers at bay. This system might sound like a racket, and in many ways it was, but it was also a well-oiled machine that kept the city-states running smoothly. Temples provided stability in a world where nature was unpredictable and often unforgiving. They offered a network of support that could mobilize resources in times of crisis, a bit like an ancient FEMA, but with more ceremony and fewer press conferences. The influence of the temples extended beyond the walls of the city. They were crucial in trade, acting as hubs where goods were exchanged and deals were struck. Sumerians were savvy traders, and their reach extended as far as the Indus Valley in Egypt. The temples facilitated these exchanges, ensuring that the wheels of commerce kept turning, all under the watchful eyes of the guards. But let's not get too cozy with this romanticized view. The system, as efficient as it was, also had its dark side. The temple's economic power meant that inequality was baked into the Sumerian society like a clay loaf. Wealth was concentrated among the temple elite, and the common folks were often left with the crumbs. The divine mandates that justified the temple's dominance also reinforced the social hierarchy, keeping the powerful in power and the rest in line. So, while the Sumerians might have lived millennia ago, their societal structure rings eerily familiar today. Their temples were more than just places of worship. They were the epicenter of power, wielding influence over every aspect of life. In a world where the gods were as capricious as the weather, the Sumerians understood the value of having a powerful friend in the divine arena. They were shrewd enough to play the cosmic game, ensuring their survival and prosperity in a world governed by celestial whims and earthly ambitions. Stay tuned, because up next, we'll dive deeper into how these celestial and earthly dynamics played out in the daily lives of the Sumerians. From the bustling markets to the quiet corners of the ziggurat, every stone had a story, and every priest had a plan. As we peel back the layers of Sumerian life, let's zero in on the rituals and festivals that punctuated their calendar, because, folks, it wasn't just about keeping the guards happy. It was about throwing the kind of party that even an uptight sky guard like Anu would RSVP to. Now, if you think your New Year's bash is epic, let me introduce you to Akiru, the Sumerian New Year festival that was basically Coachella meets a board meeting. This wasn't just a day-long affair. We're talking about a 12-day extravaganza of divine proportions, held twice a year to keep things fresh, once in spring and again in autumn. You know, just in case the guards needed a mid-year reminder that they were still in charge. The Akiru festival kicked off with the kind of drama that would put a soap opera to shame. The high priest would lead a procession to the temple of Nana, the moon god, because nothing screams new beginnings like a lunar deity. The highlight, a ritual humiliation of the king, which sounds like a bad day at the office, but was actually a sacred reset button. The priest would strip the king of his regalia and slap him. Yes, you heard that right. The leader of the city-state got a slap, and not the gentle kind. But before you feel too sorry for the king, remember that this public shaming was a strategic move. It was all about showing that even the king was subject to the guard's will. After the slap fest, the king would be restored to his throne, symbolically reborn and ready to lead with divine blessing. Think of it as a spiritual detox, with a side of medieval BDSM. The guards were big on pageantry, and the Sumerians delivered. Statues of deities were paraded through the streets in a display that was part Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade, part spiritual pilgrimage. These processions weren't just for show. They signified the guards' presence among the people, a reassurance that the divine shareholders were satisfied with the city's governance. It was a bit like having your boss show up for the annual company picnic, but with more incense and less awkward small talk. The Akiru wasn't just a religious affair, it was a social and economic bonanza. Temples opened their granaries, distributing food and drink to the populace, ensuring that no one went hungry while the guards were partying. This was a strategic move, cementing the temple's role as the benevolent provider and reinforcing the social contract between the divine and the mortal. The festival also attracted traders from far and wide. turning the city into a bustling hub of commerce and cultural exchange. Picture the streets lined with stalls, hawking everything from fine textiles to grain, as traders from the Indus Valley to Anatolia mingled with the Sumerian locals. The Akiru was the ultimate networking event, where commerce and faith shook hands in a divine alliance. Now, let's tackle the myth-busting part. The Akiru festival is often romanticized as a harmonious blend of faith and festivity, a time when gods and mortals danced together under the stars. But beneath this idyllic surface lay the sharp edges of political maneuvering. The festival served as a platform for the ruling elite to assert their power, both religiously and politically. It was a reminder that while the guards might have been the nominal guests of honor, it was the priests and kings who pulled the strings. The theatrical elements of the festival, from the ritual humiliation of the king to the grand processions, carefully orchestrated to reinforce the social hierarchy and keep the populace in line. In the grand scheme of Sumerian life, festivals like Akiru were the glue that held society together. They provided a sense of continuity and stability in a world where the next harvest was never guaranteed. By renewing the social and cosmic order, the Sumerians ensured that their city-states remained harmonious and prosperous. It was a delicate balancing act, where faith, politics, and economics intertwined in a dance as intricate as any ziggurat carving. The Akiru festival, with its mix of sacred and secular, was a reflection of the Sumerian worldview, a belief that the gods were not distant figures, but active participants in the daily grind of life. It was a time to reaffirm the bonds between the divine and the mortal, a reminder that in the cosmic game of survival, everyone had a role to play, whether you were the king getting slapped or the farmer toasting to another year of bountiful harvests. The impact of the Akiru reverberated beyond the temple walls, shaping the political landscape of the city-states. It was a stage where alliances were forged and rivalries were played out, a strategic chessboard where each move was calculated to secure divine favor and earthly power. The festival was a testament to the Sumerians' understanding of the intricate web of relationships that governed their world, a world where the divine and the mundane were inseparable, and where every ritual had a purpose, every festival a deeper meaning. As we delve further into the rituals and festivals of the Sumerians, we'll uncover how these ancient traditions influenced not only their own civilization, but also left an indelible mark on the cultures that followed. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the rich tapestry of Sumerian life, where the past and present collide in a timeless dance of faith, power, and survival. While the Sumerians were busy throwing their multi-day festival bashes and keeping the celestial order in check, they were also crafting some of the earliest myths and legends known to humankind. Enter stage left, the epic of Gilgamesh, a tale that would make even the most seasoned Netflix screenwriter salivate with envy. We're talking about a narrative rich in adventure, existential musings, and more bromance than a buddy cop movie. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, a city that served as a melting pot of culture and creativity. With a rule that dates back to around 2700 BCE, Gilgamesh wasn't just any monarch. He was a demigod, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, which sounds like a math problem, but was actually his superpower. The Sumerians, ever the pragmatists, knew that a little divine intervention in their ruler's lineage added a touch of legitimacy, a bit like sprinkling fairy dust over earthly ambitions. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a 12-tablet saga, a Sumerian bark set, if you will, that delves into themes of friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning. The hero's journey begins with Gilgamesh running a tight ship in Uruk, but his tyrannical tendencies wear thin on the citizens, prompting the guards to intervene. Enter Enkidu, the wild man of the steppe, crafted from clay and saliva, because why not? Their ensuing friendship is legendary, and not in the Platonic sense. This was a bromance for the ages, a tale that would make even the most stoic Sumerian shed a tear or two. The story vividly explores the adventures of this dynamic duo, from slaying the bull of heaven to battling the monstrous Humbaba in the cedar forest. These episodes weren't just about the thrill of combat. They were rich allegories for the trials and aspirations of human life. The Sumerians used these tales as moral and educational tools, teaching lessons on leadership, courage, and the acceptance of one's own mortality, a theme that hits harder than a Sumerian scribe after a night of celebrating a kiddo. The epic wasn't just an internal affair. It had legs, influencing cultures far beyond the boundaries of Sumer itself. The tale of a great flood, a narrative cornerstone of the Epic of Gilgamesh, finds echoes in the later stories of Noah's Ark in the Bible and other ancient flood myths across the Near East. It's like the ancient world's version of a blockbuster hit, with everyone wanting a piece of the action. It's a testament to the Sumerians' knack for storytelling that their myths could travel far and wide, shaping narratives across time and geography. But let's not kid ourselves. Like any good storyteller, the Sumerian scribes took liberties. The epic's larger-than-life characters and dramatic events were as much about entertainment as they were about imparting wisdom. The scribes knew their audience, crafting tales that could capture the imagination while delivering a cosmic punchline. They understood their story with a divine demigod, and a wild man could sell better than a dry recital of historical facts, much like how modern filmmakers might choose a superhero over a mundane accountant as their protagonist. The creative license taken by these ancient scribes was not just artistic flair. It was a reflection of the values and beliefs of Sumerian society. The epic served as a cultural touchstone, a way for the Sumerians to explore complex ideas about human nature, power, and destiny. It was a reminder that even a king as mighty as Gilgamesh was ultimately subject to the whims of the gods and the inexorable march of time. As we delve deeper into the myths of Sumer, it's clear that these legends were more than mere stories. They were the cultural currency of their time, shaping the way people understood the world and their place within it. These tales provided a framework for understanding the human experience, offering both guidance and cautionary tales. The Sumerians weren't just spinning yarns. They were weaving the very fabric of their civilization, one epic at a time. Their myths were a reflection of their aspirations, fears, and understanding of the world, a world where the boundaries between the divine and the mortal were as fluid as the Tigris and Euphrates themselves. So, as we continue our journey through the annals of Sumerian history, let's not forget the power of a good story. The myths they left behind were not only a testament to their creativity, but also a window into the soul of a civilization that laid the foundations for so much of what followed. Stay tuned, because the next chapter will delve into how these ancient narratives continue to inspire and influence the cultures that rose from the ashes of Sumer's once great city-states. And speaking of stories that stand the test of time, let's dive into the Sumerian religious practices and explore how these ancient rites left their fingerprints all over the civilizations that followed. Imagine the Sumerians as the original influencers, with their deities and rituals setting trends that would echo down the corridors of history. They were the blueprint architects of religious practices, and their legacy is like that one catchy song that never quite leaves the charts. First, let's tackle the myth of decline. Some folks might picture Sumerian religion as a candle snuffed out by the winds of time, but the truth is far more nuanced. Sure, the city-states of Sumer eventually faded into the dust, but their ideas morphed and traveled, evolving like an ancient meme. As the Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian empires rose, they didn't just sweep the Sumerians under the rug. They borrowed heavily, adopting gods and rituals like picking up the latest smartphone model. Enlil and Anu might have been rebranded with new names, but their essence remained, like a timeless fashion trend that never goes out of style. The Babylonians, for instance, took a page straight out of the Sumerian playbook. They revered Marduk as their chief deity, but this wasn't a creative reboot. It was more like a sequel with familiar faces. Marduk's ascent to the top of the pantheon mirrored Enlil's prime position, complete with the divine trappings and cosmic responsibilities. And then there's the Code of Hammurabi, the Babylonian legal text that owes a nod to Sumerian legal traditions. Hammurabi's laws carved in stone were a testament to the enduring power of Sumerian concepts of justice and order, like finding the perfect recipe and passing it down through generations. The Sumerian influence didn't stop there. Fast forward to the Assyrians, who took the idea of divine kingship to the next level, much like a sequel that amps up the special effects. The Assyrian rulers claimed Anu and Enlil as part of their divine entourage, and their ziggurats rose even higher, each brick a testament to the enduring architectural genius of their Sumerian predecessors. It's like the original Sumerian ziggurat was a prototype, and the Assyrians just added a few extra floors. Let's not forget the Egyptians, those masters of monumental architecture and elaborate afterlife plans. When you compare the Egyptian pantheon with the Sumerian lineup, you can't help but notice a few familiar features. The Egyptians had their own cosmic CEO in Ra, the sun god, but the concept of divine kingship and a structured pantheon of gods was something they shared with their Mesopotamian neighbors. The Sumerians might not have built pyramids, but their tiered ziggurats were stairways to the heavens, and you can bet the Egyptians took notes. Now, here's a fun fact. The Sumerians weren't just religious trendsetters. They were also pioneers in storytelling. Take the flood narrative from the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale that trickled down into the biblical story of Noah. The idea of a great deluge wiping the slate clean resonated with many cultures, a universal reboot button, if you will. This narrative seeped into the collective consciousness, a reminder of nature's fury and the fragility of human existence. But let's get real for a moment. While these myths and rituals offer romantic glimpses into the divine, they also reveal the harsh realities of life in ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerians weren't just spinning tales for the fun of it. Their stories were born from a world where floods and famine were constant threats. They understood that nature could be as unpredictable as a reality TV star, and their religious practices were a way to make sense of it all, a cosmic insurance policy against the whims of fate. Speaking of insurance, let's talk about those temples. Far from being relics of a bygone era, the economic systems established by the Sumerians laid the groundwork for future economies. The temples functioned as proto-banks, where grain and goods were deposited and loans were made. This system evolved over centuries, influencing economic practices in the empires that followed. The idea of a centralized repository for wealth and resources was as revolutionary then as it is now, a concept that would resonate through history like a bell tolling in the distance. And let's not forget the human themes woven into the fabric of Sumerian religion. Their stories were filled with questions about life, death, and the pursuit of meaning, questions that are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its exploration of friendship, mortality, and the search for eternal life, could easily be the plot of a modern existential novel. The Sumerians were grappling with the same big questions we are, peering into the void and wondering what it all means. It's a reminder that, despite the passage of millennia, some things never change. Human nature, it seems, is as constant as the stars. In the end, the legacy of Sumerian religious practices is a testament to the enduring power of ideas. They laid the foundation for the complex tapestry of beliefs and rituals that would follow, each thread a reminder of a civilization that understood the profound connection between the earthly and the divine. The Sumerians weren't just the architects of their own destiny. They were the architects of ours as well, their influence echoing through the corridors of time. So the next time you ponder the mysteries of the universe or find yourself caught in the rhythm of a familiar ritual, remember the Sumerians. They were the original storytellers, the original theologians, whose legacy continues to shape the way we see the world. It's a legacy that reminds us of the power of faith, the complexity of human nature, and the eternal quest for understanding in a world as unpredictable as the Tigris and Euphrates themselves. As we wrap up our journey through the annals of Sumerian history, let's tip our hats to the ancient pioneers who set the stage for so much of what followed. In a world where the divine and the mundane danced together in an intricate ballet, the Sumerians understood the value of a good story, a good god, and a good grain harvest. And in that, they weren't so different from us after all. In the grand tapestry of history, ancient canon is that little patch of fabric that accidentally ties two bigger pieces together, but never quite gets the spotlight. Nestled snugly between the powerhouse civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, the ancient Hebrews found themselves in the awkward position of being the world's first middle management. Forget any notion of them as some grandiose trading empire. They were more like the universe's reluctant interns, tasked with keeping the in-between running smoothly while the real bigwigs made all the noise. Let's talk geography, shall we? Canaan was the land of milk and honey, or at least that's how the brochures sold it. In reality, its landscape was more like a challenging jigsaw puzzle. You had the coastal plains, mountains, valleys, and the desert, all thrown together like Mother Nature, was feeling indecisive that day. Despite these geographical shenanigans, the location was pure gold for trade. Imagine being smack dab in the middle of the ancient world's equivalent of a bustling highway, the Via Maris. This was the route everyone and their camel took when they wanted to shuttle goods between Africa and Asia. That's right, if you were moving anything worth moving, you were traipsing through Hebrew territory. Now, let's crush a few dreams of those romantic notions of silk-robed merchants and opulent caravans a la Lawrence of Arabia. The reality, a lot less glamorous. The Hebrews dealt in the basics. We're talking olive oil, wine, grain, none of your fancy spices or silks here. Olive trees were practically sprouting up like weeds, and vineyards were a dime a dozen. If the ancient Hebrews had a signature scent, it was probably eau de crushed olives with a hint of fermentation. The wine they produced wasn't exactly Bordeaux, but it got the job done. And when it came to trade, they weren't riding high in ornate caravans. They were probably trudging along with donkeys, the trusted Uber of the ancient world. Now, before you start picturing these ancient Hebrews as the Jeff Bezos of olive oil, let's set the record straight. Their trade wasn't exactly the stuff of economic legends, more like subsistence with a side of bartering. But here's the kicker. Being the middleman had its perks. They got access to Egyptian papyrus, Babylonian textiles, and all sorts of exotic goods without having to travel far. Who needs a passport when the world comes knocking at your door? Politics, too, played a cheeky role in this trade tale. The Hebrews weren't just trading goods, they were trading favors, alliances, and sometimes a bit of tension. Picture this. You're sandwiched between two superpowers who don't always play nice. One minute, you're shaking hands with a pharaoh, the next, you're trying not to tick off a Mesopotamian monarch. The Hebrews became adept diplomats, not just traders. They had to be, navigating the delicate dance of keeping everyone happy, or at least not angry enough to invade your backyard. And speaking of myths, ever heard of those tales that paint the Hebrews as a unified, monolithic entity expertly orchestrating trade like a well-oiled machine? Yeah, about that. The reality was a patchwork of tribes, each with its quirks and agenda. They weren't exactly the ancient equivalent of a Fortune 500 company, more like a loosely organized startup trying to figure out its mission statement while the world's superpowers loomed overhead. But let's not diminish their impact. The Hebrews held a critical position in the ancient trade network, whether they liked it or not. They were essentially the world's first Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day shipping. Goods flowed through Canaan, not in a torrent of luxury, but in a steady stream of essentials that kept the ancient world ticking. Their land, though not vast or particularly rich in resources, was the connective tissue in a much larger body of trade. So, the next time you're sipping on olive oil-drenched hummus or enjoying a glass of wine, give a nod to those ancient Hebrews. They might not have been the rock stars of trade, but they played a crucial, albeit understated, role in the grand concert of history. And in a world where trade routes were the veins of civilization, the Hebrews were the heartbeats that kept it all alive and kicking. And so we find ourselves smack in the middle of the trade routes, where the ancient world's equivalent of Google Maps was a network of dirt paths that could either lead to a bustling marketplace or a bandit's lair. Let's kick things off with the King's Highway, the ancient superhighway of the Middle East. This was no scenic route for Sunday strolls. It was the logistical backbone of trade, stretching from Egypt all the way to Damascus. Talk about a commute. We're talking roughly 200 kilometers, give or take a few detours to avoid the occasional hostile territory. Think of it as the I-95 of the biblical world, minus the road rage, but with a surprising number of tolls. Now, forget the idea of ancient toll booths looking anything like today's easy pass lanes. Picture more of a pay-the-local King's Guard to cross this bridge or face a rather unfriendly spear kind of situation. These tolls were less about road maintenance, because, let's be honest, maintenance was barely a thing, and more about lining the pockets of regional powers. The cost, varying widely depending on the mood of the collector or the perceived wealth of the traveler. Call it a medieval game of how much can I get away with charging. Then there was the Via Maris, the coastal route that hugged the Mediterranean like a long-lost lover. This was the path for those who like to view with their travels, albeit at the risk of getting sand in places sand should never be. The Via Maris was shorter than the King's Highway, covering around 400 kilometers from Egypt to Syria, But it was no less vital was the goda for moving goods like Egyptian linen and Phoenician purple dye, the latter being the ancient world's answer to haute couture. Traveling these routes was no picnic, despite what romantic notions of camel caravans might suggest. The average pace, roughly 20 miles a day if you were lucky, assuming your donkey didn't decide to invent a new meaning for stubborn halfway through the journey. And the donkeys weren't just for hauling goods. They were your ride, your cargo space, and sometimes your only companion. Think of them as the original all-terrain vehicles, only with more attitude and less horsepower. Speaking of logistics, let's talk about the ancient world's version of Amazon's fulfillment centers. These were way stations, strategically placed to offer rest and resupply. Forget the comforts of a holiday inn, though. These stops provided the bare essentials: water, fodder for the animals, and maybe a roof over your head if the weather decided to play nice. No spa treatments or continental breakfasts here, just a safe spot to catch some shut-eye and avoid becoming the night's entertainment for a pack of curious jackals. Now, about those bandits. No ancient trade story is complete without them. They were the opportunistic entrepreneurs of their day, operating outside the law and often in the most inconvenient places. These guys were less Robin Hood and more take what you can and run, making travel a risky business. Traders had to be as savvy with a sword as they were with a balance sheet, proving that not much has changed in the world of business since then, except maybe the weaponry. In terms of time frames, a full trip along these routes could take weeks, if not months, depending on weather, political tensions, and the occasional herd of wild animals crossing paths. Compare that to today's 2-day shipping, and you start to appreciate the patience of ancient traders. It was less about speed and more about endurance. Trade was a marathon, not a sprint. But here's the kicker. Despite all these challenges, these routes were the arteries through which the lifeblood of commerce flowed. The routes weren't just lines on a map. They were the very fabric connecting civilizations, allowing goods, culture, and ideas to mingle in ways that shaped history. Sure, the ancient Hebrews weren't commanding fleets of ships or amassing vast wealth, but they were the connectors, the facilitators, the networkers of their time. So, as we traverse these dusty paths of history, remember that behind every olive jar and wine jug was a story of perseverance, negotiation, and sometimes sheer luck. The ancient Hebrews might not have been the kings and queens of trade, but they were the unsung heroes who kept the world moving, one donkey load at a time. And in a world where every journey was an adventure, they proved that the real treasure lay not just in the goods traded, but in the connections forged along the way. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how trade reshaped Hebrew society like a potter working clay. The ancient Hebrews were no strangers to the age-old dance of supply and demand, and their economic landscape was as layered as a baklava. You see, trade wasn't just about moving goods from point A to point B. It was about shifting power dynamics and creating class distinctions that would make even the sharpest social critic raise an eyebrow. First, let's talk numbers. Trade was the lifeline that fed the Hebrew economy, with some estimates suggesting that trade accounted for a significant portion of their economic activity. The surplus, generated from agriculture, primarily olive oil and wine, those ancient cash cows, provided the fuel for commercial exchanges. Olive oil, in particular, was the rock star of commodities, with its uses ranging from cooking to lighting lamps. 1 amphora of olive oil could fetch enough to keep a family in bread and lentils for months, and when you're bartering with essentials, those trade goods quickly become the currency of social mobility. But contrary to romanticized visions of merchants as the cosmopolitan jet-setters of their day, Hebrew traders were more like savvy hustlers. Sure, they rubbed shoulders with Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Babylonians, but it wasn't all about exchanging pleasantries and passing around exotic spices. The reality was much more grounded. Trade was a job, not a cultural exchange program. Merchants were the ancient equivalent of gig workers, hustling goods wherever they could find a market, often sticking to the basics rather than dabbling in luxuries. Now, let's bust the myth of the merchant as the cultural ambassador. While trade routes did facilitate the exchange of ideas and customs, the primary aim was profit, not enlightenment. The job of a merchant was more about haggling over the price of barley than pondering the mysteries of the universe. They weren't exactly swapping philosophical treatises at the trade posts. They were calculating the best price for their goods and trying to avoid getting swindled by the local chieftain. Speaking of hierarchy, the rise of a merchant class began to stir the social part. We're talking about a time when wealth was traditionally tied to land ownership. Trade introduced a new kind of wealth, liquid, mobile, and less dependent on the land. This economic shift began to blur the rigid social lines. Suddenly, a shrewd trader with a knack for negotiation could climb the social ladder, rubbing elbows with the landed gentry. Think of it as the Bronze Age version of social media influencers suddenly getting invited to high society balls. Politically, the trade routes were both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, they brought wealth and goods that were vital for survival. On the other, they attracted the attention of regional powers who wanted a piece of the action. The Hebrews had to navigate these waters carefully, balancing alliances with the Egyptians and Mesopotamians while keeping an eye on the growing influence of the Phoenicians and their maritime prowess. It was like playing a high-stakes game of chess where each move could determine your survival. Economically, trade also meant taxes and tolls. These were not paid in the form of neat little coins, but often in kind or through labor. The revenue from these tolls lined the coffers of local rulers and enabled them to maintain their grip on power, because nothing says stability like a well-fed army. However, this also meant that the common folk, who bore the brunt of these taxes, were often at the mercy of the whims of their leaders. And if there's anything history teaches us, it's that power rarely plays fair. Let's not forget the marketing tactics of the day, which were less about catchy jingles and more about word of mouth. Reputation was everything. A merchant known for fair dealings could command higher prices, while a reputation for shoddy goods or sharp practices could follow you like a bad smell. And while the ancient Hebrews weren't handing out freebies with their shipments, they understood the value of a satisfied customer. Because in a world without Yelp reviews, word of mouth was both your best friend and your worst enemy. Now, it would be easy to romanticize this as a golden age of trade, but let's keep our sandals on the ground. The reality was gritty, challenging, and often precarious. Economic fortunes could rise and fall with the annual harvest, a bad season spelling disaster for traders dependent on surplus goods. And while trade did bring prosperity, it also brought conflict, as rival powers vied for control of these lucrative routes. So, as we traverse this tale of ancient trade, remember that behind the olive oil amphora and the jugs of wine were stories of survival, ambition, and the relentless drive to carve out a better life. The ancient Hebrews weren't just passive players in a game of global commerce. They were active participants, navigating the complexities of their world with a shrewdness that would make any modern entrepreneur nod in understanding. And while their story might not be one of legendary empires or monumental wealth, it's a testament to the power of trade to shape societies in subtle but profound ways. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. There's more to uncover about the ancient Hebrew economy, and we've yet to delve into the nuances of their political maneuvering and social transformations. So grab your metaphorical donkey and let's keep this journey rolling, one step at a time. As we continue our journey through the bustling crossroad that was ancient Hebrew society, let's shift our gaze to the power players who shaped its destiny. We're talking about the big wigs, the head honchos, the Egyptian pharaohs and Babylonian kings who found the Hebrews as crucial pawns in their own high-stakes chess games. No pressure there, right? First up, let's roll out the red carpet for the Egyptian pharaohs. These guys weren't just dabbling in pyramid schemes, pun intended. They were the regional superstars with an eye on every trade route that could fill their coffers. The ancient Hebrews found themselves in frequent negotiations, or should we say, arm-twisting sessions, with these rulers. Pharaoh Shashank I, for example, wasn't shy about flexing his muscles when he launched a military campaign into Canaan around 925 BCE. According to the records on the Temple of Ammon at Karnak, Shashank's little jaunt wasn't just about sightseeing. It was about reasserting Egyptian influence over trade routes that the Hebrews were conveniently overseeing. And then there's the tale of Solomon's wealth, story that's been spun so many times it might as well be a Hollywood blockbuster. The Bible paints Solomon as the Jeff Bezos of the ancient world, sitting atop a mountain of gold. I mean, the guy allegedly received 666 talents of gold per year, which in today's money would make Scrooge McDuck's money bin look like pocket change. But before we start imagining Salam and diving into piles of gold coins, let's call in the myth-busting squad. Archaeological digs, like those at Tel Megiddo and Hazor, offer a sobering reality check. While they have uncovered grand structures and some wealth, the evidence doesn't quite match the biblical narrative of opulence. The temple records and remnants suggest Salaman's wealth was significant, but not on the divine level of extravagance that the legends suggest. It's a classic case of ancient PR spin. Salaman's court might have been more about strategic marriages and alliances than literal mountains of gold. Think less gold-plated everything and more smart trade deals with a touch of diplomacy. Speaking of spin, the Egyptians weren't the only ones casting a shadow over Hebrew trade. Enter the Babylonian kings, who brought a whole new level of complexity to the table. Nebuchadnezzar, Roman II, the king with a name that sounds like a sneeze, was a key player here. He wasn't just interested in the Hebrews for their charming company. It was all about strategic advantage. When he conquered Jerusalem in 586 BCE, he wasn't just collecting cities like Parchaman. He was securing trade routes and resources to fuel his empire's ambitions. The Babylonian captivity that followed was a grim reminder that trade and politics were a package deal, often with a hefty price tag. Now, let's toss some quotes into this historical stew for added flavor. The Hebrew Bible, always a reliable source of drama, recounts Nebuchadnezzar's exploits with a flair that would make Shakespeare proud. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept, says Psalm 137. 1. Capturing the Psalmer mood of a displaced people. It's a poignant reminder of how intertwined trade and geopolitics were, with human lives often caught in the crossfire. But let's not just focus on the doom and gloom. There's a silver lining to these narratives, albeit a tarnished one. The Hebrews, ever the resilient bunch, found ways to adapt and thrive even under foreign rule. The exile in Babylon, while harsh, also led to a cultural and religious renaissance. It was during this period that much of the Hebrew Bible was compiled and edited, a testament to their enduring spirit. Talk about turning lemons into historical lemonade. The reality was that trade was never just about the exchange of goods. It was an intricate dance of power, survival, and sometimes pure luck. The legends of Salaman and the actions of Nebuchadnezzar remind us that the stories we tell often gloss over the gritty details of how societies operated. They were not just trading olive oil and wine. They were navigating a world where alliances could shift with the wind and where a single misstep could mean disaster. And while we're on the topic of legendary figures, let's give a nod to the Phoenicians. These maritime maestros were the FedEx of the ancient world, zipping goods across the Mediterranean faster than you can say Tyrian purple. Their influence on Hebrew trade was significant, with their ships ferrying goods, ideas, and culture. The Phoenicians were the kind of neighbors you wanted if you could handle their competitive streak. In the end, what these historical figures and events show us is that the ancient Hebrews were masters of adaptation. They were the ultimate survivors, managing to carve out a niche in a world dominated by giants. Whether they were negotiating with pharaohs, enduring Babylonian exile, or trading with Phoenician sailors, their story is one of resilience and ingenuity. As we wrap up this part of our tale, remember that we're not done yet. There are still more layers to peel back, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover about the ancient Hebrews. So, hold onto your historical hats, because the journey continues, and it's bound to be just as intriguing as what we've uncovered so far. Stay tuned for more revelations and a deeper dive into the economic and political intricacies that shaped this fascinating corner of history. As we peel back the final layers of this ancient tale, we find ourselves face to face with the long shadow cast by trade routes on Hebrew culture and identity. You see, trade was the original social media. It connected, influenced, and occasionally sparked an existential crisis. Now, let's dive into how these well-trodden paths of olive oil and wine did more than just fill amphorae. They filled the cultural and religious tapestry of the Hebrews with vibrant threads of foreign influence. First, let's talk cultural exchanges. Trade routes were the ultimate melting pots long before anyone thought to name a city after a giant apple. As goods moved, so did ideas. The Hebrews, nestled conveniently between the titans of Egypt and Mesopotamia, became cultural sponges. Picture this: Hebrew traders peddling their olive oil, while simultaneously soaking up Egyptian hieroglyphic wisdom or Babylonian astronomical insights. It was like a TED talk on the go, minus the conference badges and overpriced lattes. The evidence? Well, take a look at the linguistic cross-pollination. Hebrew script itself took cues from the Phoenician alphabet, the ancient world's Helvetica of choice. This wasn't just some accidental scribble swap. It was a conscious adoption that streamlined communication and record-keeping. Ever tried keeping track of olive oil sales without a ledger? Exactly, but it wasn't all sunshine and papyrus scrolls. The influx of foreign ideas also meant a challenge to traditional beliefs. Enter the prophets, those fiery orators who warned against the seductive allure of foreign gods. The book of Jeremiah, for instance, is practically a rant against the adoption of Babylonian practices. Do not learn the ways of the nations, it warns. Translation: keep your olives kosher and your deities local. Yet, despite the prophet's best efforts, cultural blending was as inevitable as getting sand in your sandals on the Via Maris. Now, let's pivot to the economy. Trade wasn't just about goods changing hands. It was about power dynamics shifting like desert sands. The once rigid social structure began to resemble a game of Jenga, precarious, but with potential for upward mobility. Merchants, those ancient side hustlers, found new avenues to wealth and influence, challenging the old guard of landowners. It was the start of a slow revolution, one amphora of oil at a time. And what about religion? Trade routes played a sneaky role here too. The centralization of religious practices, think Solomon's temple, was partly a response to the influx of foreign influences. A unifying religious identity became a bulwark against cultural dilution. In a way, the Hebrews were like today's indie bands, fiercely guarding their unique sound amidst a sea of mainstream noise. But let's not romanticize this as a peaceful exchange of pleasantries. Trade had its casualties. The constant push and pull of foreign pressures meant that Hebrew identity was often in flux. The Assyrian and Babylonian captivities were stark reminders that trade routes were coveted prizes, and not just for their economic potential. They were the arteries of influence, and everyone wanted to be the heart pumping the blood. Yet, for all its challenges, trade also fostered resilience. The Hebrew identity that emerged was one of adaptability. Much like the olive tree, it thrived in rocky soil, drawing strength from adversity. This resilience was codified in their religious texts, which emphasized themes of endurance and faith. The Hebrews, it seemed, were the original comeback kids. Fast forward to the modern era, and we see echoes of this ancient dance in today's global trade networks. Sure, the modes of transport have swapped donkeys for drones, but the essence remains unchanged. Trade is still the lifeline of economies, the catalyst for cultural exchange, and the occasional source of geopolitical headaches. Just swap out the Via Maris for the Suez Canal, and you've got yourself a modern parallel. So, what's the takeaway from this historical odyssey? It's that trade, much like life, is a complex tapestry of opportunity and challenge. The ancient Hebrews may not have been empire builders or legendary traders, but they were the vital connectors in a vast network. Their story is one of survival, adaptation, and the enduring power of connections, be they economic, cultural, or spiritual. As we wrap up this tale, remember that the legacy of these trade routes is still felt today, echoing in the global exchange of goods and ideas. In a world where technology shrinks distances and cultures continue to blend, perhaps we can learn a thing or two from the ancient Hebrews. They remind us that while the paths may change, the journey of trade, and the human stories it creates, remains timeless. So here's to the ancient Hebrews, who taught us that in the grand marketplace of history, being the middleman isn't just about profit. It's about leaving a lasting legacy, one olive jar at a time. Ever feel like your life could use a little chaos, a sprinkle of anarchy, and maybe a touch of role reversal? Welcome to ancient Rome's Saturnalia, the festival where chaos wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Think of it as the ultimate social experiment where your boss serves you lunch, and you can gamble away your savings with zero judgment. It's like Christmas, but with a twist that would make even the most festive elf question their life choices. Saturnalia kicked off on December 17th, and for an entire week, Rome transformed into a city where the social hierarchy flipped like a pancake. The usual Roman order tossed out the window. Masters became servants, and slaves ran the show, taking the concept of power to the people to a whole new level. Even the economy took a wild ride during this topsy-turvy affair. Local vendors couldn't believe their luck or their profits when citizens, now a bit looser with their coin purses, splurged on everything from cheap wine to extravagant feasts. And speaking of feasting, let's debunk a common myth. Saturnalia wasn't just an endless buffet with Bacchus, the god of wine, personally pouring your drinks. Sure, the elite had their share of lavish banquets, but for most Romans, it was more about the joy of sharing a simple meal, sometimes just olives, cheese, and bread. The real feast, the freedom to break the rules, if only for a week. But here's the kicker, all this merriment wasn't free. The Roman treasury felt the pinch. Public spending spiked as the state funded games and entertainment to keep the masses happy, because nothing says, let's keep the peace, like a good chariot race. Yet despite the costs, Saturnalia served a crucial role in Roman society. It was a pressure valve, a way to release social tensions in a controlled, albeit chaotic, manner. Now, let's talk gambling. You might think the Romans spent their Saturnalia evenings playing a civilized game of dice. In reality, it was more like a scene from a Vegas casino floor. Even the most pious citizens couldn't resist the allure of a little wager here and there. The law, usually as strict as a Roman centurion, turned a blind eye. After all, what's a festival without a bit of financial recklessness? As much as we romanticize these wild celebrations, it's worth noting that not everyone was thrilled with Saturnalia. The Roman Senate had its reservations, fearing that such upheaval might inspire more permanent changes in society. Yet, year after year, the festival continued, a testament to Rome's ability to embrace both order and chaos, often in the same breath. Saturnalia wasn't just a time for role reversals and indulgence. It was a vibrant showcase of Roman adaptability, a culture willing to pause and upend its norms, if only for a short while. It was a reminder that beneath the empire's rigid structure, there was room for spontaneity and even a little madness. So next time you're at a holiday party feeling overwhelmed by tradition, remember the Saturnalia spirit. Sometimes, a little chaos is exactly what you need to keep things interesting. And speaking of revelry with a splash of chaos, let's dive into the next Roman spectacle, Lupercalia. Imagine if Valentine's Day took a wild detour through a frat party and a goat farm, and you've got a hint of what Lupercalia was all about. Held on February 15th, this was not your average festival of love and fertility. Oh no, the Romans took things up a notch with rituals that would make even the most ardent romantic blush, or run for the hills. So, what exactly went down during Lupercalia? For starters, it all kicked off with the sacrifice of goats and dogs. Yes, you heard that right. Man's best friend and the farm's most versatile animal were offered up to the gods. Why? Because nothing screams fertility like some good old-fashioned animal sacrifice. Once the deed was done, the priests, known as the Luperci, stripped down to their loincloths, smeared themselves with the sacrificial blood, and ran amok through the streets of Rome, wielding strips of goat hide. People believed that a lash from these blood-soaked strips could boost fertility and bring good fortune. Picture a parade, but replace the floats with nearly naked men, and you're halfway there. But here's where things get politically interesting. Julius Caesar used Lupercalia as a stage for a little public relations stunt. This was ancient Rome, where public image was everything, and Caesar was nothing if not a master of the spectacle. During the festival, in 44 BCE, Mark Antony famously offered Caesar a crown, not once, but 3 times. Each time, Caesar theatrically refused it, playing the humble servant of the Republic. The crowd went wild, of course. It was smoke and mirrors, aimed at showing Caesar's supposed reluctance for absolute power, even as he edged ever closer to it. Why did this work so well? Well, Romans were suckers for a good show, much like audiences today who love a bit of theatre with their politics. Caesar knew that in a society where gossip travelled faster than a chariot on the Appian Way, a well-timed performance could do wonders for one's career. And let's not forget, the Lupercalia was a feast for the senses, one that paired political maneuvering with the primal allure of chaos and renewal. Now, let's debunk a few myths about Lupercalia. Contrary to the romanticized view of it as the precursor to Valentine's Day, there was nothing heart-shaped about this festival. The origins are murky, but it's believed that the festival honored Luper, the she-wolf who suckled Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome. It was about cleansing and fertility, with an emphasis on the latter. The link to Valentine's Day is tenuous at best, more a result of historical happenstance than any direct lineage. It wasn't until Pope Gelasius I, around 496 CE, officially outlawed the pagan festival that Valentine's Day began to take its place, eventually morphing into the celebration of love we know today. Why the shift? As Christianity spread, the Church had a knack for absorbing and repurposing pagan traditions. It was a savvy strategy to make the new religion more palatable to the masses who were quite attached to their time-honored festivities. By the time of Pope Gelasius, Lupercalia was seen as an outdated relic, ripe for transformation. Thus, it was nudged aside for a more sanitized celebration, one that traded goat hides for greeting cards and animal sacrifices for chocolates. Economically, Lupercalia was less about market upheaval and more about maintaining social cohesion. In a culture where birth rates had a direct impact on power and prosperity, anything that promised a fertility boost was worth its weight in gold, or goat, as it were. The festival underscored the importance of fertility in a society that needed to replenish its citizens, whether for labor, military, or expansion. Socially, the festival served as a reminder of the primal forces at play beneath Rome's polished veneer. It was a time when the usual decorum was set aside, and the raw, unrefined aspects of life were laid bare. In a way, Lupercalia was a pressure valve of its own, much like Saturnalia. It allowed the populace to connect with more elemental forces, providing a stark contrast to the structured, rule-bound existence of Roman daily life. So there you have it, Lupercalia, a heady mix of sacrifice, spectacle, and political theater, providing a fascinating glimpse into the world of ancient Rome. It was a festival that celebrated fertility with a flamboyant flair, all while serving as a platform for political posturing. And as wild as it was, it reminds us that history is often a tangled web of myth and reality, each strand woven into the tapestry of human experience. We'll leave Lupercalia here, poised on the brink of transformation, as it stands ready to be reimagined by history's relentless march forward. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the next part of our journey through ancient Rome's peculiar past. But enough about love and loincloths. Let's pivot to something even more peculiar, the art of bird-watching. No, not the kind where you're perched on a park bench with binoculars and a thermos. I'm talking augury, the ancient Roman practice of interpreting the will of the gods through avian antics. Picture this. It's the bustling heart of Rome, and a priestly figure, known as an augur, is squinting at the sky like it holds the secrets of the universe. Spoiler alert. For the Romans, it did. Augury was less about cuddling up with nature, and more about playing celestial telephone with the gods. The augurs were the middlemen, deciphering whether that sparrow's zigzag flight meant a bumper crop or a political coup. The stakes were high, and the interpretations could literally change the course of history. Let's chew on this. A single bird sighting could sway public policy more decisively than a modern-day tweet storm. These augurs weren't just hobbyists with a penchant for pigeons. They were influential figures in Roman society. Their interpretations could make or break military campaigns, dictate the timing of battles, and even seal the fate of political careers. Consider this. In 218 BCE, during the Second Punic War, the augurs determined the outcome of a naval battle against Carthage based on the flight patterns of some seagulls. Spoiler, the gulls weren't on Team Rome that day. The economic implications were no laughing matter, either. Augury was big business. Every political decision hinged on the augurs' interpretations, and their services didn't come cheap. Imagine having a subscription service where the monthly fee is a sack of gold, and your advisor is a bird whisperer with a killer toga. Rome's elite paid through the nose to ensure their ventures had divine approval. After all, who wants to launch a new campaign without a nod from Jupiter? Now, here's where it gets political. Augurs weren't just nature enthusiasts, they were power players. Their insights could be tailored to fit the agendas of those in power. If an augur had a political axe to grind or a patron to please, a harmless dove might suddenly predict doom and gloom or prosperity and peace, depending on who was footing the bill. It was ancient Rome's version of lobbying, with a side of feathered theatrics. But let's not forget the sheer absurdity of it all. Imagine a Senate meeting brought to a halt because a raven refused to croak on cue. Yet, for the Romans, this was as serious as a toga malfunction during a public parade. The augurs were seen as the ultimate mediators between the mortal and the divine realms, wielding a power that could eclipse even the most eloquent orator in the forum. It's a bit like if today's politicians had to consult a magic 8-ball before passing legislation. The practice of augury highlights a fascinating intersection of religion, politics, and economics in ancient Rome. It also served as a convenient reminder of the gods' omnipresence in daily life, reinforcing the social order by suggesting that even the most mundane events were touched by divine will. This belief system, however, didn't just pop up overnight. It was deeply ingrained in Roman culture, reflecting a society that valued signs and omens as much as it did rhetoric and reason. And speaking of reason, let's debunk a myth. Augury wasn't just a quaint, antiquated superstition. It was a sophisticated system of divination that required years of training and a deep understanding of Roman religious and cultural law. The augurs were highly educated, often coming from the elite classes, which only amplified their influence. They were the original spin doctors, crafting narratives that could steer the Republic's ship through stormy political seas. Yet, for all its ritualistic gravitas, the practice of augury also underscores the inherently human desire to find meaning and reassurance in the unpredictable chaos of life. It's a reminder that, whether through birdwatching or blockchain, societies have always sought patterns and signals to guide their decisions. The Romans just happened to have a flair for the dramatic, making augury a spectacle that was part science, part theater, and all politics. As we wrap up this flight of fancy, let's not forget the broader implications. Augury served as a critical tool for maintaining the status quo, ensuring that the gods, and by extension, the social hierarchy, remained firmly in charge. It was a clever way to legitimize power, offering a divine stamp of approval on decisions that shaped the empire's destiny. And while the birds may have been the stars of the show, the real power lay in the hands of those who claimed to understand their celestial chatter. So next time you see a flock of pigeons taking flight, remember the Romans and their avian advisors. It's a testament to humanity's enduring quest to decipher the world around us, even if it means gazing skyward and hoping for a sign. And as we continue to explore the strange and wonderful rituals of ancient Rome, stay tuned for more tales of intrigue, power, and the occasional absurdity as we delve deeper into the annals of history. And speaking of signs from above, let's pivot to a different kind of spectacle where the only thing taking flight might be a dove released at the end of a funeral procession. That's right, we're diving into the world of Roman funerary practices, a realm where death was less a humble farewell and more a grand exit worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. If you thought the Romans knew how to party, wait till you see how they did funerals. Spoiler, it was extravagant, expensive, and yes, a tad bit gruesome. Imagine this. You've shuffled off your mortal coil, and instead of a quiet ceremony, your family is gearing up for a procession that could rival a triumphal parade. The wealthy Romans weren't content with a simple send-off. No, they had to outdo each other even in death, turning the streets of Rome into a stage where the deceased was the star of the show, albeit a very silent one. And why not? In a society that thrived on status and spectacle, your funeral was the final act in the grand theater of your life. But let's strip away the romance and look at the nitty-gritty. These funerals were not just about saying goodbye. They were public declarations of wealth and influence. Families would hire professional mourners, known as praefeci, to wail and lament loudly. For a fee, these women would shed tears and beat their breasts, creating an atmosphere of emotional upheaval that would put any soap opera to shame. And here's the kicker. The more mourners you had, the more prestigious your send-off. Talk about crying all the way to the bank. Now, let's talk numbers. A proper Roman funeral could cost a small fortune, sometimes as much as 100,000 sesterces, or roughly the annual salary of about 100 legionaries, and that was just for starters. The procession might include musicians, actors wearing wax masks of the deceased's ancestors, because nothing says family values like a parade of death masks and a lavish funeral pyre. The goal was to ensure your life and death was remembered forever, or at least until the next extravagant funeral stole the spotlight. The real kicker, this wasn't just about honoring the dead. It was a strategic move to solidify the family's social standing. In a society where legacy was everything, the grandeur of your funeral could set the tone for your descendants' futures. Keep the memory alive, keep the status alive. It sounds morbid, but in Rome, that was the game. Of course, this level of opulence wasn't universal. The average Roman citizen, with a more modest income, couldn't afford such elaborate displays. Their funerals were simpler, more personal affairs. Yet even here, the pressure to conform to societal norms was immense. Families would go into debt to ensure their loved ones received a proper send-off. Because in Rome, shame was a fate worse than death. While we're on the subject, let's debunk a myth or two. Contrary to some romanticized notions, not every Roman was laid to rest in a grand mausoleum. Many were cremated, and their ashes placed in simple urns, often within communal burial grounds or columbariums, multi-story buildings resembling modern-day apartments for the dead. Think of it as eternal housing in Rome's booming necropolis real estate market. And for those who were buried, the tombs themselves were often practical affairs, sometimes reused by multiple generations. These weren't just final resting places. They were investments in family legacy, often inscribed with poignant epitaphs that spoke to the virtues and deeds of the departed. It was a way to keep a piece of your story alive, long after the mourners had moved on to the next spectacle. But let's not get too sentimental. The harsh reality was that these practices underscored the stark wealth disparities in Roman society. While the elite could afford lavish reminders of their power and prestige, the lower classes often had to make do with whatever they could scrape together. It was a society where even in death, the divide between the haves and have-nots was glaringly apparent. Now, let's delve into the economic implications of this funeral frenzy. The demand for funerary goods and services created a thriving industry in Rome. Artisans, stonemasons, and even florists found lucrative business opportunities catering to the dead. The market for sarcophagi, urns, and tomb sculptures boomed, with intricate designs reflecting the wealth and status of the deceased. It was a death-driven economy that ensured even in the afterlife, the coffers kept jingling. And yet, while the economic wheels kept turning, the social pressures were relentless. Families were expected to host post-funeral banquets, a tradition known as the refrigerium, to honor the deceased and provide a feast for the living. These gatherings were as much about social networking as they were about mourning. After all, who could resist striking a deal or two over a hearty meal in the shadow of eternity? So, what's the takeaway from all this? Roman funerals were a complex interplay of public display, economic activity, and social strategy. They were a reminder that in the ancient world, as in life, appearances mattered. The spectacle of death provided a canvas on which the living painted their ambitions, aspirations, and anxieties. And as we ponder these ancient rites, let's keep in mind the ever-present human desire to be remembered. The Romans, with their flair for dramatics, simply took it to an extreme. In a world obsessed with legacy, they ensured their stories would echo through the ages, even if it meant turning their final farewells into a grandiose theater of the absurd. So, as we continue our journey through the peculiar rituals of ancient Rome, remember, whether through bird-watching or funerary processions, the Romans knew how to put on a show, and in doing so, left an indelible mark on history. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricate web of Roman customs, where the line between life and death was as much about spectacle as it was about survival. Death may have been an elaborate affair in ancient Rome, but life, particularly for the Vestal Virgins, was a different kind of spectacle altogether. These women were the rock stars of Roman religion, revered and held to impossibly high standards, all while performing rituals that were as mysterious as they were crucial. The Vestal Virgins were tasked with maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, a flame that symbolized the security and prosperity of Rome itself. If this fire went out, it wasn't just a bad day at the office. It was considered an omen of disaster for the entire city. Let's set the stage. 6 priestesses, chosen as children between the ages of 6 and 10, served for 30 years in the Temple of Vesta. They were expected to embody purity, a living symbol of Rome's well-being. But before you think this was some sort of ancient girl power gig, let's dig a little deeper. Sure, they were granted privileges unheard of for women at the time, like owning property and voting, but the cost was astronomical. We're talking a lifetime of celibacy, under the constant gaze of a society ready to pounce on any perceived transgression. It was less live the dream and more walk a tightrope. The mythology around their purity was both their shield and their cage. A Vestal caught breaking her vow of chastity faced a fate as grim as a horror story. Live burial. That's right, they were entombed underground with a flickering lamp, a bit of bread, and a final farewell to daylight. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but this was real life in Rome, circa 5th century BCE. The reasoning: if a Vestal's purity was compromised, so too was the city's fortune. Talk about pressure. But let's not sugarcoat it with all doom and gloom. The Vestals were celebrities in their own right, holding a revered place in society. They attended games and festivals, enjoyed seats of honor, and wielded influence that could sway the decisions of powerful men. If a condemned man passed a Vestal on his way to execution, she could grant him a last-minute reprieve. Imagine the power in a simple nod from one of these women. It's like the ancient Roman version of a presidential pardon, only with more flair. And then there's the economics. Maintaining the Temple of Vesta and supporting the Vestals wasn't cheap. State footed the bill, ensuring these priestesses lived comfortably, quite the contrast to the average Roman citizen. Their lifestyle was a testament to the value placed on religion as a stabilizing force in society. In a city where political winds shifted as quickly as a chariot race, the Vestals were seen as a constant, a living insurance policy against chaos. Yet, for all their privileges, the Vestals lived under the constant threat of public scrutiny. A single misstep, whisper of scandal, and their lives could spiral into tragedy. The myth of their inviolable purity was a double-edged sword, offering protection while simultaneously putting them on a pedestal from which any fall would be fatal. It's a classic tale of reverence and exploitation, adored yet imprisoned by the very society that worshipped them. Let's bust a few myths while we're here. The romantic notion that these women were entirely isolated from the world is just that, a notion. They participated in public life, albeit under strict guidelines. The idea that they were untouched by politics is another historical fantasy. The Vestals were deeply entwined with the political machinations of Rome. Their support or disfavor could influence public opinion in a way that few others could manage. They were players in the grand game, whether they wanted to be or not. As we wrap up our exploration of Rome's strange rituals, it's clear that these practices were more than just eccentric traditions. They were reflections of a society striving to balance order and chaos, reverence and exploitation, belief and pragmatism. The Vestal virgins, with their blend of power and vulnerability, exemplified this delicate dance. They were guardians of Rome's legacy, living symbols of the city's fortunes, and stark reminders of the human cost behind the grandeur. So, what's the takeaway? Whether through fire-watching or funerary fanfare, the Romans mastered the art of legacy. They understood that in a world where life was unpredictable, rituals provided a semblance of control, a way to leave a mark, to ensure that their stories, however embellished, would endure. As we close this chapter on the strange and spectacular world of ancient Rome, let's remember that, while history often gets romanticized, the reality beneath is always a little more complex, a little more human, and infinitely more fascinating. Here's to the Vestals and their eternal flame, a symbol of a society forever striving for significance, even amid its own contradictions.